across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Thank you to Julia. Back, of course, on Monday, right here at the home of Common Sense. This is Talk. Lots to get through, including Keir Starmer, accused of inviting criminals to cause carnage after cutting jail terms for dangerous offenders as prison hits 99% capacity. But don't worry, they're going to build 3 new ones, probably in the next 10 years or something. And their workaround on this is utterly gobsmacking. We'll come to that. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has unveiled plans to send failed asylum seekers to return hubs in third countries, with around 100,000 currently in the United Kingdom. I thought they were pathologically against third countries. They made a right hullabaloo about Rwanda, even when it was even mooted as an idea. Details on the way, and the NHS is now treating nursery-aged children identifying as transgender after scrapping its previous minimum age limit of 7. We have legitimised child abuse going on in the system, kids. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. I genuinely don't know where to start with this because there's a couple of subjects that kind of conflate on this. We are going to talk about prisons, and I am going to throw that question to you. Which offences really deserve jail time? Which offences really deserve jail time? And naturally, which ones don't? And I suppose it's the latter that becomes the more pressing point, given that we're absolutely rammed to the rafters in Britain's jails. And we know that this latest 28-day free up space initiative, which could see abusers, sex offenders, those accused of domestic violence recalled to prison after breaching their licence conditions, allowed back onto the street after 28 days. So you're released halfway through your sentence or whatever it happens to be. You go out, you commit exactly the same offence or something similar. You breach the conditions in whatever respect, you go back to jail, but only for 28 days. That's not really the point of prison, unless you shouldn't have been in prison in the first place. I mean, it might well be that. And the whole prison story is a complete mess at the moment. We broke the news yesterday of another prison guard being attacked, having their throat slashed by an inmate. Your throat slashed. You have to... It throws up so many questions, right? How do you get a knife or what kind of system are we running here? What sort of protection are we giving prison officers? I mean, the list goes on. And now we've got a female prison officer who smuggled a syringe into jail to try and artificially inseminate herself with a sex offender's sperm. I mean, this is the stuff, if you put that in a Netflix show, they go, well, that would never happen. It was one of those little Calpol syringes. You know those things? Something rather satisfying about dispensing one of those, but that's another story. But in this context, she smuggled it in there, don't ask, and was hoping to, even though she was a prison officer, she went to visit the guy she wanted to be the father of her baby, who'd committed horrendous acts, and I think one against children as well. She presumably with the idea that he was going to utilise the syringe and then at some point give it back to her. I mean, you've really got to get your timing right if you think you're going to get bingo on the affirmative when it comes to pregnancy on that one. So everything is up in the air. It's all a little bit of a mess, and there are people in prison that probably shouldn't be in prison. Who are those people? What are the offences that you think, do you know what, that's ridiculous? And there's a very obvious high-profile case at the moment that we are fully aware of, and that is of Lucy Connolly. She is currently in jail. She's serving 31 months for that tweet. Today, she's at the Court of Appeal. Well, the Court of Appeal are hearing the case in an attempt to have her sentence reduced. Now, this goes back to the riots, of course. She's a former childminder, a wife of a Conservative councillor. And she wrote on Twitter, for those who haven't seen this was hours after that horrendous Southport attack, and you may remember I mean, again, talking about things you couldn't put in a TV drama because they would just sound invented. All of the nonsense that went around that, and people wrongly suggesting who was responsible for the attack. And on the back of that, she put a tweet out saying, "Mass deportation now. Set fire to all the effing hotels, full of the B word, for all I care. And while you're at it, take the treacherous government politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will now have to endure. If that makes me a racist, so be it." Now, Lucy Connolly is clearly a certified half-wit, and based on that, not very pleasant. I can't imagine a grown adult writing something as awful as that. But I do get the anger. But I also know that being awful and thick are not criminal offences. I also know that 31 months in jail is not OK in a free democratic world. There are other ways you can punish someone. And for her, by the way, she's the wife of a Tory politician, I would imagine the sheer levels of humiliation would have probably done it. That would have been enough. I know the system doesn't work like that. But I look at a case such as that and I do wonder about, and I'd happily take your call specifically on this case. And equally, for those, having a pop, because, look, we know we live in a world where you will defend people or situations or faked images online if they suit your political agenda. And if those faked images, the Macron cocaine story is a classic, all right, with all manner of folk wading in on this one. If it was Lee Anderson, then people would have had a very different view of it. If it was Jeremy Corbyn, people would have had a very different... Do you know what I mean? So it depends where you sit politically on how you view this stuff. And I'm going to try and be about as fair on this as I can, because I also happen to think that the co-founder of Just Stop Oil, Roger Hallen, who got 5 years in jail for motorway protesting, this man is another nut job of the highest order, an absolute pain in the backside, stapling himself to gantries and supergluing his testicles to the tarmac, whatever the hell he does, to try and stop traffic, to highlight the fact we're all going to die. So, yeah, he's a nut job. But again, being a nut job is not illegal, all right? And I don't happen to think, at a time when we've got a 99% capacity in our prison system, I don't think Lucy Connolly or Roger Hallam should be in jail. Not only is it taking up valuable space, I just don't think that's the appropriate punishment for people guilty of those kind of offences. Now, I'm not a lawyer, all right? Somebody will go, well, if you don't make it, that's why parking tickets are 60 quid. If you make it really simple, then, people would just park wherever they like. It's interesting. Somebody has just texted me saying, Lucy Connolly is an Oxford graduate. Well, yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me. But thick as mints when it comes to clearly knowing your way around how you would respond to something, all right? So what she wrote was awful. We all know that. She shouldn't be in jail. And neither should Roger Hallen be in jail. And I reckon there's loads of other people that shouldn't be in jail either. All over the place for offences that you couldn't reasonably say incarceration is the right way forward. People who didn't pay their TV licence. I know this is few and far between these days, but of those that get jailed. Nobody, absolutely nobody on the planet should be in jail because they refuse to pay their TV licence. There's another. We've got 3 on the list here. We've got Roger Hallam, Lucy Connolly and people who dodge the TV licence. None of those people should be in flipping prison, OK? It's a ridiculous waste of time, a ridiculous waste of money, and has no proportionality or effectiveness to the original offence, not in any way reducing the severity of some offences. You take the point. Who else or what else would you put on that list? 0344 499 1000. I am also, by the way, as a side point to all of this, genuinely intrigued about what lines we draw when it comes to online speak. Is anything online okay? Is that where we have to go with this? Because based on Connolly going to jail, then, man alive, there's people that should be doing about 20 years for stuff they've written online. You'd have to agree with that as well. Should it just be a Wild West where we let anything go, no matter how awful or horrendous it is? We move into a sort of Black Mirror territory on this one. 0344 499 1000. What sentences really deserve jail time? Which ones don't, for that matter? And your comments specifically on Connolly, whose appeal is being heard as we speak. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Steve N. Allen, the comedian and broadcaster, is with us. Afternoon to you, Steve.
Good afternoon. It's nice to be here until I get raided by the police for previous tweets.
Well, indeed, you could be in jail, of course. I mean, I've seen your stand-up, but that's another story. So, you know, who knows? Too easy. But who knows where this could end up after the next 20 minutes. So let's start with specifically on that Connolly story, because I think, to me, I'm fascinated by this. She, of course, was jailed for that social media post inciting racial hatred. She did plead guilty to this. She was sentenced after posting it online following the Southport triple murder. Let's have a listen to the moment the judge sent her to jail.
You used the social media platform, then known as Twitter, to publish the following, quote, "Mass deportation now. Set fire to all the hotels full of the for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will now have to endure. If that makes me racist, so be it." The sentence on count one, therefore, is one of 31 months imprisonment.
31 months in prison. And I was reminded, by the way, I'll tell you what, Steve, there's a previous Lucy Connolly out there, a guy called Nicholas Robinson. No one ever talks about Nicholas Robinson. Nicholas Robinson was jailed during the London riots back in 2011. And he nicked a £3.50 bottle of water and got 6 months in jail for it. I think there's another example of why, we need to rethink some of these areas where people go to prison.
But at least that was a crime. At least that was nicking something, which means you could move that into the category of actual crimes, whereas a tweet, it's not. No one should ever be arrested. Like there's the story of in Kent, the special police guy who had 6 officers return up because he tweeted something. He was in an online row about some pro-Palestinian tweet. There is never a reason to put someone in handcuffs for a tweet. It's not. I mean, I might sit here and say she should be in prison because she might tweet again. Oh no! Even if there is recidivism, it was a tweet. No one. All right, I'll say why she shouldn't have tweeted that in a sec. But no one would read that tweet and go, "Oh, I wasn't actually going to go and set fire to any hotels, but saw that tweet, so did it."
Correct.
Again, so she's not actually playing a role in making anything worse. Now, she shouldn't have sent the tweet because also, what do you think your stupid tweet does? That is also virtue signaling, isn't it? It's like you're sending that out onto the internet for what? So you can show that you're angry. It's a tweet. You're not actually going to achieve anything. It is mildly funny that she's married to a politician and in it says how bad politicians are. That's going to come back and bite her during a row. That's going to be interesting. But yeah, I mean, she shouldn't have had any prison time, let alone 31 months.
What is the interesting thing about inciting racial hatred, that previously, I suppose, would have been used in a kind of riot situation where somebody was standing there with a megaphone saying, attack that group of people now, or, get over to that house and torch it, or something. I'm assuming something like that. I can't think of, because we didn't have social media then, so to be inciting it, or maybe you were part of an underground group that was sending out leaflets saying we're all going to meet in a square somewhere in a town in the middle of the UK and kick off. I don't know. But now, of course, we're in social media territory. I mean, people do lose their minds on social media. I mean, you've got those who are kind of pathological tweeters who are on it all day long. I see people who have tweeted. Literally, I saw somebody the other day, and I roughly did a calculation, who I think had tweeted more times in a week than I have since I've ever been on Twitter, which is something like 10, 15 years or whatever it is. So there's people who are addicted to it, and I guess they maybe lose sight of reality when you're in that world. And you've got other people saying similar things.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the amplification of social media. There used to be just odd bods down the pub shouting stuff out that you'd avoid, and now they've got a social media platform. In some case, they own a social media platform, and therefore their message gets spread further and wider. But again, was it, I know she pleaded guilty, but was it inciting anything? Because her tweet just said, do something for all I care, which is not saying go and do it. And it was just a tweet of anger. And again, I revert to the point. Surely no one saw that tweet and was motivated to act on it. But also, it's not about the content of the tweet, really, is it? I think the fundamental thing here is you shouldn't be arrested and sent to prison for a tweet. Your tweet should have to be deleted. The social media platform can have some sort of responsibility to get rid of those things. And that pretty much should be the level of punishment. Your Twitter post gets taken down, you do something worse, your account gets taken down.
It was taken down, reasonably quickly. I mean, within a matter of hours, as I understand it. But bizarrely, she pleaded guilty, I would assume, on the advice of a lawyer who probably thought, well, she's never going to go to jail for this. So maybe it was that. Judges do seem to impose harsher sentence against the backdrop of a riot. When the guy who nicked the water that I was talking about back in 2011, the judge at the time said, District Judge Alan Baldwin said, the background of serious public disorder was an aggravating feature. So a same sort of thing happened then in 2011, where people were given sentences that on any other day of the week you would never have been given. I don't believe Lucy Connolly would have gone to jail had that happened a year ago or in a year's time. It was at that point. Now, it was clearly a stupid thing to write, and you'd think someone with an educated brain would have realised it was a stupid thing. And it wasn't a very nice thing to write. But, I don't really care about nice. And we all agree it was stupid. She agrees it was stupid. It was regrettable and, not a clever thing to say. But none of those things are criminal offences.
Yeah, and even if she didn't change her mind on it and take it down and realise that it was a bad tweet, we had the ability to reply to it saying, well, that's ridiculous. We could have disagreed with her. And then there's the balance on the internet. This is without even getting community notes involved. So I think that there's a different ecosystem to have this row, and it doesn't need to include the prison system, especially when it's a bit full. I mean, if you don't like her tweet and you send her to prison for it, if you wanted to try and fill the prisons, you could just have like a quick afternoon just going through some of the replies I get. And then you could send some of those people to prison. Next thing you know, job done.
Job done. And, of course, if you look around the Twitter sphere, you will see tweets that are far worse than what she wrote on that one. And just as a final point on specifically about her, Steve, if she'd gone to jail for 6 weeks, we might just have been able to go, OK, she'll be out in 3 weeks. So, yeah, all right, not ideal, but we see what they're doing. But 31 months, I think that was the almost overriding issue in the end, that it was such a long sentence.
I know, but I think at my core, I don't think anyone should ever be arrested or sent to prison for a tweet, because we're giving too much power to a tweet. It is a stupid rambling out into the internet. That's all it is. It's shouting out into the wilderness. I mean, it was only up for 4 hours, and I'm not sure she got that many followers. And not that it is about how much interaction it gets. But come on, it was just a tweet that people are free to ignore if they choose to.
Yeah, there it is. And that does get into that other territory, which... I mean, I almost lay awake at night thinking about this one, because I'm so fascinated by the whole free speech thing, which I'm an advocate of. And then you wonder, well, OK, should the online, which is why I said at the beginning, Steve, should anything go online? I mean, you can be as horrific as you like, because in the real world, when somebody is piling in on somebody, as we see quite a lot, whether they're left-wing or right-wing, Nigel Farage gets a ton of hassle on a daily basis. That woman who forgot to put her knickers on for a photograph, she gets a ton of hassle on a daily basis. So if you look at that, you would never invite people to, I don't know, Wembley Stadium, would you, to say, hey, come down and, we're going to put this person on the stage and you can all shout horrible things at them.
Yeah. But we shouldn't just let the internet be a Wild West, because we don't let the real world be. It's the same rules. Saying something on Twitter is the same as saying it. And that's why I always remind that. I remind myself, don't tweet something that you wouldn't say to someone's face, because, and maybe this is just a specific bloke thing, but I think we go through lives realising if you say a certain thing at the wrong time, you're going to get punched in the face. And it's a good thing that just keeps you from doing something a bit too offensive, isn't it? It's a rule that we just have to stick to. Do the same thing on the internet, and the next thing you know, you've never been too offensive. So, yeah, same rules as apply. You can't just say whatever you want. There's free speech, but if you break a law with your words, then you've broken the law. But if all you've done is an offensive tweet, you've not broken a law, and I don't even know how you end up in prison.
Steve, stay with us. Lots more to discuss. That question of what offences really deserve jail time and which ones don't, I think we can all agree. Writing something on Twitter. Well, then you get into the chair. Well, what if you literally put a death threat in? Is that... I mean, some argued that's what this was. I don't know. Should there be any grey areas there? But there are other things, like not paying your TV licence. Nobody should be in jail for that. Nobody should be in jail for a parking offence, for God's sake. But I bet you there's some examples where it ended up there. More stories to come. Keep it here. Lines are open. This is Talk.
Albanian prisoners and criminals are, a significant number of them in UK jails. A lot of them have been sent back. They did strike a deal with Albania. The last government, Rishi Sunak, had. So 95% of the Albanians who crossed over do get sent back automatically now, because essentially they have a deal that if you are Albanian and you land in Britain, you try to claim asylum or you try to come here, you just get sent back to Albania immediately, which is a very effective deterrent. And actually, numbers of Albanians crossing illegally into the UK.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is...
Don says, in my view, we should be transporting people to Australia if they use hurty words or steal a loaf of bread. I kind of agree. I think we need to bring that back. It was very effective back in the day. Stuart says Lucy Connolly is jailed for a tweet, so should Wes Streeting for tweeting he would like to throw Jane Moyer under a train. Yeah, I mean, I get that, but I think you can all kind of... I don't think either should be in jail, by the way. But I guess when you say, I want to strangle someone, it's a turn of phrase, as distinct from something you might just actually mean. I guess that's the difference, Stuart. I don't know. But neither should be in the chiller. 0344 499 1000. Steve N. Allen is with us, the writer, comedian and broadcaster. Let's look at this story, Steve. It falls into what we were just discussing about prison and who should be there, who shouldn't. But domestic abusers and sex offenders breaching licences will be freed after 28 days as prisons near capacity. The Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, warns this is vital to prevent a breakdown of law and order. Let's have a listen to what she said at that very quickly cobbled together press conference in Downing Street just yesterday.
While the spending review is ongoing, I can announce today that the Treasury will fund our prison expansion plans in full across the spending review period. This is a total capital investment of £4.7 billion. It allows us to start building 3 new prisons, including breaking ground on a site near HMP Gartree later this year. This investment will also fund new cells at existing prisons, with new house blocks and rapid deployment cells opened across the country.
That's the quality of our politicians these days, kids. I'm sure Barbara Castle, if she was around, can sleep safely on the left wing of the party. But there it is. That's what they've decided to do. 28 days and you're back out, Steve. I'm not quite sure if this quite works.
No, it can't work, can it? Because, yeah, look, you can sit around and pontificate about whether prison is really a deterrent. What should you be doing there? Is it all about rehabilitation, right? Put that to one side. The fact that you know that you can do a crime and probably not even get arrested for it. If you do, your trial's going to be in 4 years. If you do eventually get sent to prison, there'll be some sort of a scheming that gets you released after about 3 days. And if you reoffend, you're back in for just less than a month. You will be returned back to prison under that new system for less time than we had to give to get something posted to you when you order on through the catalogues. Do you remember when it used to be allowed 28 days for delivery?
28 days, allow 28 days for delivery. What an extraordinary thing. You'd be calling the lawyers now if you had to wait 28 days.
And that was a short amount of time in the old days, and now that's a punishment to be sent back for it. So look, the way it's set up at the moment, there is no risk, is there? The thing that stops people doing crimes is that if they believe they will get caught and will get punished. And then you can have the side argument about what the punishment / rehabilitation should be. But at the moment, you are sending the message of you'll probably get away with it in some form. Something will happen that means you don't get the worst version of this. Yeah. And so, look, the solution's always been build more prisons. I've got clips of us talking on your show, because I keep them, because I'm like that, because you never know.
It's your ringtone, isn't it?
It is. It's just you moaning about stuff is my ringtone. But we were talking about this last year, and you know, if they start building something by then, it still wouldn't be ready because we can't build anything quickly in this country. But at least it should have been started by then. We knew it was happening. Operation Early Dawn and Operation all the other ones. Yeah. We knew it was a temporary thing, and at some point we'd be up against the buffers again. And guess what? We're back there with like 400 spaces left in male prisons. Who would have seen that coming? Oh, only everyone. And I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? There are some houses near the edge of town where I live, some new builds that are being whipped up there so quickly. It's the bit of my running route. Every time I run past there, it's closer to completion. And yet it's probably going to take a decade and a half to get a prison built, because for some reason, if the government's involved, it's like grand designs. It's over budget and it's over schedule. So look, I mean, I wish I could be anything other than miserable about this, but no, their system will not work.
We've just got time for this story, Steve. Keir Starmer unveiling a new illegal migrant scheme. He's confirmed plans to deport failed asylum seekers to third countries through what they call return hubs, because that sounds kind of like something official and sort of almost quite nice. It's a return hub. It's got all the right elements to it, despite him scrapping the Rwanda scheme, of course, which he did after about 3 minutes in office. Let's have a listen to the Prime Minister and Nigel Farage battling it out at PMQs yesterday.
We at Reform, a party that is alive and kicking, very much enjoyed your speech on Monday. You seem to be learning a very great deal from us. But can I encourage you, please, to go further as a matter of national security? Over the weekend, an illegal immigrant from Iran, who we believe came by boat, was arrested in the north of England on serious charges of terrorism. Since the speech on Monday, 1,000 young, undocumented young males have crossed the English Channel.
The Borders Bill is the first bill to give terrorism-like powers to law enforcement, precisely so that we can get in before the crimes are committed, before people get to this country. That's right, this is the most far-reaching provision ever for law enforcement to defend and secure our borders.
That all sounds just terribly inept to hear Starmer even trying to sound strict on immigration. It's not in his DNA. His political radar doesn't ping when he thinks about channel crossing. He's just not there. And yet here he is going, oh, we might have to use some third countries.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there was a plan already. I mean, there are some differences. The Rwanda plan was actually having people processed over there, and depending on the result, they would have stayed over there. Germany's version of that, because everyone was saying, oh, they've nicked our plan, was actually just processing over there and being sent back to Germany as soon as you're approved. Now, and I think this is the crucial difference. They will only be sent to a third country if they have exhausted all lines of appeal in the UK, which is a lot. So I predict no one's being sent to those third countries, because the amount of time you can spend going back to a different court, another appeal, you got a decade or so worth of that. By the time any of that happens, there'll be a different government in. So, let's just throw some money at it, make some posters. It'll never happen.
100%. Steve, thank you as ever. Steve N. Allen, the comedian and broadcaster, with us on the programme. Over to you. There's a range of stuff that we've touched on there. We're up for all of this, and comment on whatever you like. What offences really deserve jail time, which ones don't, like tweeting and protesting peacefully, etc. We'll talk to Chris Daw, the barrister, writer and broadcaster. Chris Daw, Casey, with us in a moment. When Chris comes on, often we have an almighty row, and lots of you go, that guy, he's a left-wing lawyer. But actually, you might agree with him on some of his views on prison when it comes to much of the stuff we've been discussing. And also Sam Samworth, who we've spoken to before, former prison officer, is going to be with us too, to throw some light on those people on the inside that really should not be on C-Wing. There would have been a better form of punishment, surely. Our lines are open. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is
25 to 2. Interesting one from Gary, who says you can point to cases like Lucy Connolly and argue that she shouldn't be in prison, but to be honest, it's a side issue because there are relatively small numbers of cases like hers. The simple fact is the vast majority of people in prison belong there, either because they are serious criminals from whom the public needs protecting, or they are repeat offenders who, despite having gone through multiple rounds of alternative sentencing, have not stopped their offending. The climate activist Roger Hallam, who you mentioned, is a classic example. He wasn't jailed for blocking the road, as you claimed. He was jailed because he was one of those repeat offenders who wouldn't mend his ways. In fact, he was already on a 2-year suspended prison sentence for his previous repeat offence. When he committed the offence, he eventually went to prison for. Quite frankly, what do you do with somebody who just keeps ignoring the courts and carries on offending? And of course, I don't think it's a coincidence that since climate protesters have been sent to prison, the climate activist group Just Stop Oil decided to no longer get involved in that sort of direct action. So you could argue that in their case, prison worked. And I agree. I also concede, Gary, that I don't know what the alternatives are if you are a repeat offender, although when Roger Hallam went to jail, he got 5 years. Some of his colleagues, I think, got 3 or 4 years. I don't know what their previous was in that respect. But there is clearly an argument about the futility of jail in many cases. What are those offences that shouldn't carry a custodial sentence. In a moment, we'll speak to Sam Samworth, former prison officer and host of the Real Porridge podcast. But first, Chris Daw, KC, barrister, writer and broadcaster, who regularly helps us out with this kind of stuff. I reckon we can get through this without a row, to be honest, Chris. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
You've spoken and written and researched, gone around the world, looking at custody, what it does, custodial sentences, whether they work, whether they don't work. I know you've got a very, emphatic view on this, that you do think for quite a lot of offences, prison just is not the place to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. The prison population, people may be surprised to know, is comprised of 68% of non-violent offenders, so who haven't physically harmed anyone, who are in prison often because of significant mental health disorders, breaches of orders because their lives are chaotic and disorganized, and all sorts of other reasons that have nothing to do with directly harming other people. And of course, much of it to do with the drugs trade as well, which of course is responsible for so much of the prison population and so much crime in this country. But I think you're absolutely right. I think the problem is that every time there's a sort of high-profile incident of almost any kind, we have calls from government for new laws and tougher sentences for people to go to prison for longer, rather than a grown-up conversation about who should really be in prison, because they're needed to be in prison to protect the public, which is what, in my view, prisons are for.
There's a couple of areas that the two that I've sort of settled on is one of Lucy Connolly and the other of Roger Hallam, the Just Stop Oil guy. Now, Gary just messaged in, you probably heard me read that, and says, what do you do with somebody who constantly ignores the courts? They've already got a suspended sentence, they've ignored it again. How do you deal with somebody like that then?
Well, you have to do something different, don't you? Because I mean, one of the things that always amuses me in this situation is when these things happen, where someone is sent to prison and then it doesn't really work, and then they're sent to prison again and it doesn't really work. The argument is, well, we should send them to prison more and for longer. Well, if you sort of took a medication that didn't work every time you used it, you might have a think about whether you might try a new medication. So in this case, the answer is that most of these recidivists either commit offences because of some underlying addiction, mental health problem, or sort of catastrophic life situation, or because they are on some sort of mission to make a point or to campaign for a cause, as you say, such as the environment and people who block the roads and those kinds of things. And they're very different. So if you take someone who's intent on blocking roads and obstructing the public, those people often are not particularly deterred by being sent to prison themselves. And in fact, I've been at court watching some of these environmental cases play out, particularly at Southwark Crown Court, where I spent a lot of time last year. And it's quite frankly, obviously, a form of media protest and a form of deliberately engineered use of the criminal justice system to achieve some degree of martyrdom, to get sympathy from people, or simply just to get publicity, full stop. And I think, the reality is you've got to deprive these people of these things. You've got to deprive them of the publicity that they seek. And you've just got to ensure also that your laws are broadly in line with what makes sense from the public's point of view. And a lot of our criminal laws are not. And so you just get people being locked up for no proper reason.
And going back to the issue of what people do online, during the Southport riots, there was clearly a lot of people went to jail for stuff they said on Facebook or Twitter. Now, this is very specific because it's kind of new in a way, relatively new in the criminal world, that these are words you put onto a social media platform. Some of those words are not very pleasant. Some might be racist. They might be inflammatory, or in the case of Lucy Connolly, incitement to racial hatred was the thing she pleaded guilty to, etc. Firstly, Chris, before we get into that, there's no doubt about it that during the backdrop of riots, sentences were harsher than they might have been had it been written a year before.
Yes, they were. And there were lots of cases that came before the courts in respect of the rioters, which came very quickly before the courts, where there was adequate resource given and court time given to those cases at the expense of rape victims and the victims of other crimes. So that was a classic example where there's this big media furore understandably around the events that took place in Southport. there were thousands of people making ill-informed comments all over the social media, of which Lucy Connolly was just one example. I mean, there were probably millions, but certainly thousands and thousands of people saying utterly inappropriate and deeply offensive things. For me, so what? I don't believe that we should be prosecuting and locking people up for stuff they put on Twitter, particularly not mothers, and particularly not mothers whose I believe she'd even lost a child and had a very traumatic kind of few years leading up to sending what were a series of completely inappropriate and offensive tweets. But come on, putting a mother of children into prison for sending tweets. What on earth is going on when rapists and burglars and all the other criminals who harm people day in, day out, physically, psychologically, and in all sorts of other ways, are not prosecuted at all or sit in a queue for a trial in 4 years' time? The world has literally gone mad.
100%. And of course, what's interesting about these cases is that most of the people, from what I can gather, I can't honestly say all of them, but certainly the ones we seem to cover, the people pleaded guilty. So, did you write that tweet? Yes, I did. I can't deny that. But you're charged with inciting racial hatred. Well, you're a defence lawyer. I'm guessing, Chris, you wouldn't have advised a client to plead guilty to that.
Well, I mean, I can only base it on you've got to remember that inciting racial hatred requires intent. That requires the person to have that specific intention. So, you have to make judgments when you sit down with a client and you hear what they have to say and their explanation for what they've done. It's at that point you say, well, based on what you tell me, I actually do think you probably committed the offence and probably have to plead guilty. Or, well, actually, I know what you said was deeply offensive, but it doesn't appear that you really wanted people to go out there and commit violence against other people. It's a very inappropriate and hostile form of public comment. But at the end of the day, it is comment, and we do have freedom of speech, supposedly, which is being hugely infringed by many of these cases where the police are turning up to arrest people for sending tweets, including children, and people who are trying to look after children who are being arrested because of something they may have said on the spur of the moment on Twitter. And I just think it's all gone too far. Social media is the Wild West. You can't police it. There is no way you can stop people putting things on social media, not least because it's international. So if someone in California or Hong Kong wants to say something deeply offensive on Twitter about someone in England, no one can do anything about it because they're in Hong Kong or America. So the idea that just because you happen to be in Britain, if you send an offensive tweet, they're coming after you with the cops. But if you're, over the other side of the channel when you send the tweet, we're not. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Let social media be a Wild West. Try and keep children off of it as much as possible, particularly the more offensive elements of social media. And otherwise, just treat it as what it is, which is mostly a load of fluff.
That's true, it is. But of course, the obvious example, and I know we don't make law based on the most extreme cases. I think it's called bad law, or you'll correct me if I'm wrong there. But
hard cases make bad law.
Yeah, indeed. But if somebody does tweet, Reg, who lives at number 43 Acacia Avenue, I think he's a paedophile. I think you should go round there and smash his door down and kill him. If it is that would surely be
direct incitement to murder. So yes, I mean it wouldn't matter if it was on social media or on the telephone.
Okay,
I mean,
that's very specific.
Well, it's the way in which you characterise it would clearly be incitement to murder. If you say go and kill this person at this address, that's incitement to murder, and that is a serious crime. We're not talking about that. We're talking, or at least I'm not. I'm talking about situations where people use words which sound threatening or have a sort of nasty overtone or undertone to them, but actually all they're really saying is I don't agree with immigration, or I don't agree with a particular kind of immigration. And I think the problem is that we only tend to police the output, which is kind of contrary, as it were, to the narrative around trying to be tolerant and fair. And the reality is, people are entitled to have very strong, offensive views about immigration. I totally disagree with most of them myself, but I totally respect the right of people to express themselves, even in quite hot-headed and spur-of-the-moment ways, because that's part of the human condition of how people communicate, but you can't obviously directly incite violence.
OK, Chris, very clear stuff. Thank you, as ever. Chris Daw, KC, barrister, writer and broadcaster. Let's get a word from Sam Samworth, former prison officer and host of the Real Porridge podcast. Afternoon to you, Sam. Let's look specifically then at that issue of capacity. You've walked and paced the wings on prisons. You know what they look like, you know what they feel like, and you must have peered into some of those cells and thought, mate, you shouldn't even be in here.
I would echo the young man who's just been on, Ian, a lot of his sentiments.
He's actually quite old, Chris, but that's another story, sir.
Well, I'm probably younger than I look, so, you know.
True enough, yeah.
But, yeah, far too many in prison who aren't a risk to the public, yeah? There is a percentage that need locking up, and for me, that percentage that need locking up, we need some sort of reform, no pun intended there. What I would like to see, a lot of what happens in courts taken out of judges' hands. If somebody goes to court, like Lucy, yeah, for instance, and then somebody goes to court who has raped a 13-year-old child, Lucy's getting 3 years, somebody's getting a suspended sentence because they're a good family man and it's their first offence, yeah? That shouldn't be happening. You know, there should be a minimum standard, let's say 7 years to serve. So when somebody, you know, attacks a child in that way, it's horrendous. And like the young man again said, you know, it's a lifetime of trauma for the family and that. When they go to court, it's not about whether you're going to prison, you're getting at least 7. And that judge is deciding whether he needs more. There's far too much of sort of people, you know, social justice warrior judges, if you like.
Do you sense, though, that I mean, there is such a thing as a non-violent offence could still be, you know, a troubling offence? It could still, I mean, you could con somebody, defraud somebody, several families lose their livelihood. There's no violence involved in that, but it's a very serious offence. I mean, how do we place an offence like that when it comes to jail time?
Very difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like I said, we could probably spend all day talking about this.
True.
I have my own ideas about, for instance, you know, if you work in a local prison, you will see a chain of people coming in. You've talked about them, repeat offenders, drug addicts, feeding their addicts, where nobody has ever addressed their addiction. Many of these people come from abuse, trauma, childhood backgrounds, yeah? And we do nothing. What we do when they get in prison is we maintain them on methadone. They'll take other drugs as well, and then they'll just go back into that cycle. Yeah.
Prison just becomes a holding pen for a period of time, right?
It is, yeah, and usually a short period of time.
Do you, Sam, I mean, we're at 99% capacity at the moment. Just a final point, Sam. I mean, what would if you were instructing the Justice Secretary right now, like, what's the first thing you've got to do to try and alleviate this incredible situation? And, of course, it can't carry on. How do we begin that process? I don't think releasing domestic abusers and the like is necessarily the answer, but what might be the answer from your vantage point of someone with experience of prison?
It's people who are low risk. Start with less than 12 months to serve, no threat to the public.
Okay.
No threat to the public. The problem is that, you know, the system is deciding in different prisons. What we should have, if we had 100,000 prisoners in list, the most risky at the top and the least risky at the bottom, that's risk to the public. Yeah? Are you still there, Ian?
Yeah, all ears, sir.
Or you've disappeared from my screen.
Okay.
But, you know, you want to free up 2,000 spaces. You take the 2,000 at the bottom of the list, irrespective of where they live, i.e. what prison they're in. That's how you do it, mate.
Yeah. Would certainly be a start, wouldn't it? Listen, Sam, always great to gauge your views on these areas. Thank you, Sam Samworth, host of the Real Porridge podcast and also former prison officer of many years' experience walking the wings of some of Britain's toughest jails. Over to you on that one. There's a couple of things up and running here. One is about prison itself and who shouldn't be there. What are the kind of offences that are ridiculous? But I am tempted to go back to this, almost my go-to example, which is oddly the one Gary used a second ago. Most people who end up in jail have already been through many non-custodial sentences before they got to jail. If I went out and nicked a car tomorrow, I'm not going to go to jail. If I nick one the following week, I'm probably not going to go to jail. If I then went shoplifting, I'm probably still not going to go to jail. I could probably even get away with some kind of online fraud thing. I'm probably still not going to go to. I have to do quite a lot. I'll get all this non-custodial community stuff before. Then after about 7 or 8, if I'm lucky, could be more, then I might go to jail. So the non-custodial stuff ain't working. How do we make it work? And what do we do with those people? All we know is that there are people that clearly shouldn't be in prison. And the online world, the Connolly case and others that find themselves behind bars as a result of a comment, sometimes very serious, not pleasant, not nice, pretty hateful, stupid acts of flying off without engaging your brain on social media. Being stupid is not an offence, of course. Thoughts on that as well? Lines are open. This is Talk.
Rupert Lowe is front and foremost in that battle. And yet here it was, Nigel Farage and their Yusuf, in their pursuit to completely control reform and not able to take any form of criticism. They sought not just to destroy his reputation, they sought to imprison this man. And every fear I had about Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe, and their Yusuf, forgive me, at that point was absolutely confirmed to me.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This comes from Pat in Fife, who says, make prisons harsher, solitary confinement, bread and water. You wouldn't want to go back. I mean, there is that school of thought, although in the States, the sort of supermax prisons are kind of in that capacity. Chris says, as a side to releasing convicts early again and building more prisons, great how they are going to staff them. The prison service is hemorrhaging staff. I left after 24 years. I would never advise anyone to join. That's going to be the other big issue, isn't it? So very well build, you know, they promise to build loads of houses. Where are you going to get the timber and the bricks from and the manpower? Same with jails. Thank you, Chris, for that. Georgina, down in London. Georgina, what is going on?
Hello, good afternoon, Ian.
Hi.
I'm calling about Lucy Connolly's sentence. This was a grave miscarriage of justice, which will have long-term and serious effects on both her and her family, especially her daughter, who has learning difficulties and has suffered terribly because of her mummy being incarcerated. She should not have pleaded guilty at all.
That's the problem, isn't it? If she'd have said not guilty, it would have gone to Crown Court and a jury would have decided, and a good defence lawyer, in this case, like Chris Dorr that we just spoke to, she would have walked free within about 10 minutes.
Yeah, well, I think this was a gross miscalculation on behalf of her legal representation.
Yeah,
for you know, they are there to do a job, and he or she has not done their job. I mean, this tweet was made when Lucy was under serious duress and suffering with mental health issues herself, including PTSD, after the tragic loss of her own daughter.
But in fairness, just to give the balance to that, Georgina, anyone could argue that, couldn't they, when they've committed what's apparently called an offence? They could say, well, I was in a bad place, you know, I lost my mum 2 years ago and I've not got over it yet. That would be a claim on any day of the week.
I totally disagree with that, Ian, because you've got to realise that it was 3 little girls who were slaughtered that day, so who better to empathise with the mothers? And yes, I can understand, you know, children's lives are irreplaceable. They are irreplaceable.
Yeah, so but we all get that, don't we?
Well, if you lose a child through cot death or what have you, and the loss of a child through slaughter, the feelings of loss...
100%, and it can, you know, to use that term, you can be triggered into places on any other day of the week you might not normally go. But a constructed tweet that isn't very pleasant, we can agree it's not very pleasant, it wasn't big and clever, and after about 4 hours, she also realised it wasn't big and clever and deleted it, and then got 31 months.
Well, this is the thing, you see. I mean, I think our judicial system at the moment needs a governing body. It's got more tears than a wedding cake, Ian. This incarceration, I think, was also political for the fact that her husband had been a Conservative councillor. If he'd have been a Labour councillor, I doubt she would have been given...
Really? Do you think the judge would have thought that? The judge was probably some old Tory duffer who lives in the Shires somewhere. Do you think he'd have really given a hoot about who her old man is?
Listen, I do. This is my view. It's not everybody's view.
No, fair point.
I'm just giving you my view.
That's fair point, George.
This woman was incarcerated to make an example of her and to deter others from speaking out.
But then again, and there were many others, of course. We're mentioning hers because it's high profile, but it was, and you're absolutely right. I mean, 31 months in jail. I mean, just shy of 3 years for that is off the scale extraordinary. It's obscene. It makes a mockery of our own judicial system. We'll take more calls on that. There is an appeal going on as we speak. We'll bring you the details when we get more. Our lines are open. Let's get the news headlines at 2 o'clock here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
What a busy first hour that was, and we are going to continue in that vein. We are, of course, talking about the ineptitude of the current government's response to prison overcrowding. Keir Starmer is accused of inviting criminals to cause carnage after cutting jail terms for dangerous offenders. Prison capacity is at 99%. Some of the people that could be released would include abusers, domestic violence, etc. All the while, we have people literally in jail because of what they wrote on social media. I mean, wouldn't you start there? Wouldn't you go, there's at least 40 people that shouldn't be there. You could do that, and a couple of really high-profile ones. We'll have more on that in just a moment. Also this afternoon, the Prime Minister has unveiled plans to send failed asylum seekers to return hubs. That's a very clinical word. It's a return hub in third countries. With around about 100,000 currently in the UK. This is the Prime Minister, of course, was very much against the third country idea. He didn't trust it. It was a terrible thing to do, so he cancelled Rwanda, and now there he is doing exactly the same thing. And the NHS is now treating nursery-aged children identifying as transgender. This is after scrapping its previous minimum age limit of 7. This is child abuse, let's make no bones about it, and it's going on your own doorstep. More on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk, 0344 499 1000. Shell says, Ian, you constantly say you believe in free speech. I honestly don't think you really do. Right, but I don't know what Michelle is referring to, because if I knew, I could respond to it. Does free speech come with caveats? Well, we gave the example of somebody saying online, I think the man who lives at number 43 is a paedophile, you should go round and kill him. Chris Daw, the lawyer, said, well, that's a very specific target, and that would be incitement to murder. But where are you drawing the line? I do think some things come with care and responsibility. I'm just not absolutely sure in the online world how the heck you even begin to police this kind of stuff. Thankfully, we have with us in the studio Charlie Downs, the philosopher. He's a political commentator, but to us, a great philosopher of these kind of areas, Charlie, because I know you feel equally as strongly about a lot of this stuff we're talking about. It's interesting, isn't it? Because you think, Lucy Connolly, for example, you wouldn't have written that tweet. I wouldn't have written that tweet. It's a bit murky, not very pleasant. But in fact, I think she acknowledged that herself because she took it down. If you didn't think that, she'd have kept it up, one would assume. And then this extraordinary 31-month prison sentence. I mean, the more you keep saying it, you can't believe that would have happened.
Well, I think one of the central lessons from this case is the fact that in moments of, heated passion, let's say, you should probably just put your phone down. Because I've certainly felt that pull to tweet something,
100%.
Incendiary or angry or whatever else in the wake of an event like Southport, for example. Yes. But you're not going to change anything by doing that, and it's not. The only thing that's going to happen, actually, is you're going to end up in jail in a country like Britain. 100%. But on the topic of free speech, more generally, I think there's a really interesting conversation to be had here, because I think that whilst the British government does not believe in free speech, demonstrably, it locks people up for, anything from Lucy Connolly's tweet right through to something completely innocuous. It doesn't believe in free speech because it thinks that essentially speech poses a threat to their ideology, basically. Because if you can, if you are able to point out the contradictions within their, within their ideology, like for example on the trans stuff, if women's rights are inalienable and one of the most important things, but actually anybody can be a woman, so what are we talking about here? If you point that stuff out, then
it is true. Anyone can be.
Then you threaten.
Did you not know this? Anyone can be. Yes.
I must have missed that memo.
I will identify as a woman for the next 10 minutes.
Wonderful. Well, you're very pretty, Ian.
Thank you very much. Thank you, darling.
But more generally, but those people on the other side of this conversation, which are generally, quite ordinary law-abiding people who feel very uncomfortable about the fact that they feel their speech is going to be policed in their own country.
Yes.
I think some of them get it wrong as well, because I think there is an idea that absolute, unlimited free speech is somehow a desirable goal, and I actually don't think it is, because I think that in all societies, in all times and places, there is always speech that is off limits, whether that is enforced through the law or whether it's enforced through kind of social acceptability. Now, I think the latter is the more desirable of the two, because I think that a society where, for example, you don't get away with saying something like, you know, like you were saying before, young children can change their gender. I don't think that that's acceptable speech. I don't think the law should be used to punish those who say that sort of thing. But I do think that if somebody in your neighbourhood was to have that kind of opinion, I don't think that they should be welcome at, you know, neighbourhood parties, at family barbecues and that sort of thing. I don't think it's right. I think there needs to be standards that are upheld through the medium of society rather than the medium of law.
But is there also the bit that fascinates me, and I'm intrigued by Michelle in South Shields, because it's Michelle's right of free speech to say she thinks I don't fully believe in free speech, but I don't know what she's specifically referring to, because I'd like to think I'm quite consistent, but I do know there's grey areas. Now, the other area this goes a little bit wrong is it depends often on where you sit politically, doesn't it? Now, when John McDonnell, remember him of the old Labour front bench, suggested that Esther McVey should be lynched, all hell broke loose on the right. And it's like, he should be fired, he should go to jail for it. I don't believe McDonnell genuinely thought she should be lynched. It's almost a turn of phrase, isn't it? You know, it's like, you know, someone needs a good slap. You don't really believe it.
Or politically lynched, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I would imagine that was the... But people lost their mind over that because they didn't like John McDonnell. I was the first in the queue to lose my mind over that. I said, yeah, this is outrageous. You can't say this, particularly about a woman MP. And also MPs are fairly vulnerable. You know, Joe Cox, David Amos, we've seen what can happen. So that's very specific. But we do pick and choose. All of us do that. It's part of our human... It's like, you know, confirmation bias with booster rockets.
And you've raised an interesting point there, which is the target of speech actually also affects how acceptable it is. Because I would say, as a kind of traditionally minded man, that it is actually more wrong to say something like that about a woman than it is to say it about a man, because a man can take it, whereas it's quite inappropriate and aggressive to say that as a man. And once again, I'm not saying that the law should intervene necessarily in cases where, you know, it's not an incitement to direct kind of violence, but there should certainly be a societal standard where we say, actually, maybe we don't speak about women like that. And that doesn't make me a feminist, that makes me actually quite the opposite.
It makes you a very decent gentleman. That's what I'd like to think. I'd like to think so. You're absolutely right. I mean, if people hate Donald Trump, then, I mean, the stuff you can see online about Donald Trump is extraordinary. Incitement to God knows what. But if you were to say that about Joe Biden, you know, then those very same people, so you can't say that about somebody. You know, well, why not? Well, because Joe's a nice guy and Donald isn't. No, that doesn't answer the question. That just completely reaffirms the ridiculousness of your position on
and it reveals actually, it reveals also how rare it is for somebody to have a truly principled stand when it comes to the subject of free speech, because quite often their opinion is coloured by politics. As you say, somebody might feel quite comfortable calling for the death of, for example, Nigel Farage, but if you were to say the same about Keir Starmer or Ed Davey, for instance, they would, you know, say that you should be put in jail.
Correct.
And as with all things, politics colours it.
And I've had that face-to-face with people in a pub who've gone, you know, well, you know, the woman who threw the milkshake, that's fine. You know, why? Why is it fine? Well, it's Nigel Farage.
Because of who it's happening to.
Because you don't like Nigel Farage? No, it's not fine. OK, who do you like? Oh, well, I quite like Ed Davey. Oh, well, so you wouldn't want anyone to throw a milkshake at him? Well, of course not. He's a nice guy. No, that's a ridiculous anti-intellectual position to hold on this. The reason this is quite a timely conversation, and you couldn't really make this up, because the big discussion yesterday, the Justice Secretary had that press conference, no real notice on it, it just sort of happened, and then they talked about this prisons at breaking point, a 28-day limit for recall is introduced. They're scratching their heads going, who's in prison, who's not in prison, who shouldn't be in prison, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, today is the Lucy Connolly appeal. Now, if you wanted to give a chunky list of people who shouldn't be in prison, folk who wrote some dodgy stuff on social media has got to be right up there, isn't it? I could help the Justice Secretary solve at least probably, I don't know how many are still in, maybe 30 people, whatever, 40 people. She could solve 30 places immediately.
Yeah, and that's to say nothing of the 10,000 foreign nationals that are currently in our prisons. So, you know, these are obvious measures.
12% of the prison population.
Yeah, these are obvious measures that we think, you know, a self-respecting, sensible government would take. Deport
you might
those,
think so.
Yeah, deport those who are in our prisons who aren't even nationals of this country.
Correct.
But I think there is, once again, a deeper conversation to be had here, because I'm reminded whenever the topic of prison overcrowding comes up of an essay by the great Victorian writer Thomas Carlyle called Model Prisons, where he, in Victorian England, mind you, did a tour of a prison, and he thought that they were too light. He thought they were too liberal, too progressive in these Victorian prisons, which is, you know, from our perspective today, sounds absolutely mental. But it's because he recognised the fact that the liberal or progressive conception of justice and imprisonment is essentially rehabilitative. And I think that that theory of justice has been proven to be absolutely wrong, doesn't interface with reality, because I think that the most effective form of rehabilitation is not hugging somebody into virtue, which is what our system tries to do now through talking therapy and de-radicalisation programs where they seek to understand why you did what you did. Actually, the most effective form of rehabilitation is punishment. And our prisons are so light on people, so light on the worst imaginable offenders, that it's no wonder recidivism rates are so high. And so I think that, you know, I don't know where we would find the money to build more prisons, but I would think that that is the solution, because we can't have sex offenders, domestic abusers, and so on, walking the streets of this country, because this country is dangerous enough as it is now, especially for young women, young women and girls and mothers and aunts and sisters and daughters and all the rest of it. And so I think that, you know, if that means slashing, for example, the foreign aid budget or asylum or net zero, any of these things where there's such waste, in order to build more prisons, I say we do it, because we need to, you know, it doesn't matter if we have to build 10 new prisons to house those offenders who need to be in prison, because if you let justice slip and if you let dangerous people out into our society, it's not long before things start to break down.
Spot on. This from Bern. It says, just listening to Ian Collins, who was talking about Lucy Connolly, appalling knee-jerk sentence given by the judge, who should be hanging his head in utter shame. You do wonder about judges. I mean, this idea that all judges are some sort of, you know, the stereotypical image of a judge was they were an old Tory that probably owned a farm somewhere in Cheshire or Kent, and loved Margaret Thatcher. Now we've kind of redesigned it again. It's a bit of projection confirmation bias here. It depends on what the sentence is, because someone here, Vic, says, regarding the caller who said Lucy Connolly may not have got a lengthy sentence if her husband was a Labour councillor, I would remind Ian of Labour councillor Ricky Jones. This is the man who's accused. I can't say too much about it because it is an ongoing case, but this is a man who is accused of doing the throat slashing kind of manoeuvre. Bailed, not coerced to plead guilty, and still a free man with his care constantly delayed. Case, I think, should be constantly delayed rather than fast-tracked. Well, he wasn't part of the same area. I'm not defending it, by the way, but those that were responding to riots, that was all fast-tracked. Anything that's happened since, and you will find, if you go through court papers on this, Vic, you will find as many Tories as Labour people who found themselves getting bail, you know, on cases such as that. And of course, pleading guilty is down to the client and the lawyer. So the lawyer, unless the lawyer's a left-wing conspiracist, in with the judge.
Which is quite possible. Which
is always possible as well. I mean, there are left-wing lawyers too.
Yes.
But
like
in
Keir
cases,
Starmer, for example.
Like Keir Starmer. But, you know, I mean, if you're a defence lawyer, then generally speaking, you are against the state on these kind of things, and you will absolutely bat for your client. And a few people just commenting on free speech as well, Charlie. Fire in the theatre, that is always the measure. You know, if you shout fire in a theatre, that's your free speech to do so. But is it? Because that's where it comes with responsibility, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's always struck me as a little bit of a facetious example, because
there is a history. By the way, I looked this up once. I can't remember what it was. There is a reason why that came around, and it was never ever a real case where someone shouted fire and then claimed it's my right of free speech.
Yeah, it also seems. I mean, it's not political speech, and really, it's political speech that is deserving of protection when we're talking about issues of free speech. Because the kind of day-to-day, quite frankly, the day-to-day conversations of ordinary people have little to no effect on the actual wielding of power in a society, and that's really where you know, speech needs to be protected, is when we're having conversations about how power is wielded in our society, because it's in those, you know, repressive societies, like many of those that existed in the 20th century, where if you were to say, I don't like the way the government is governing my country, they'd execute you, or they'd throw you in a gulag or whatever else. And so it's political speech, I think, that is important here, because if we aren't free to criticise our own government and to say, actually, the way you're governing my country, which is my inheritance as an Englishman, I don't approve of it, and I am a voter. You know, I have voted either for or against you, and I don't approve of the way you're doing this. Well, that needs to be protected, and it's essential. And so I don't know how useful those kinds of fire in the theatre examples are, really.
I just think they don't happen. That's exactly it. It's a bit like the analogy of, you know, should you be able to waterboard a terrorist to find out where the bomb is? the scenario will probably never, ever occur.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of false premise to begin with. Let's move on to this story because we've got loads of other stuff to talk about, Charlie. Time is short. Keir Starmer unveiling a new illegal migrant scheme which ships failed asylum seekers abroad, despite the fact that he was incandescent about Rwanda and thought it breached all sorts of human rights and was a very, very bad idea. But he's now decided that he's quite comfortable to send failed asylum seekers to Serbia and North Macedonia.
I think this was always the way the end of mass migration was going to go in Britain. It was never going to be with a kind of an explosion of populism, but it was actually going to be a very managerial, almost like EU bureaucrat flavoured kind of thing, where we do have return hubs and we treat it as this kind of cold procedure rather than a kind of emotional thing. I think it's good. I mean, it shows you how effective many of us who have been banging this drum for so long have been at shifting the conversation in this direction. I mean, the success of reform at the locals, no doubt, was the main straw that broke the camel's back here. But it is funny, isn't it? How I mean, I wonder whether you've given Starmer too much credit there, saying that he thought Rwanda was some kind of evil scheme. Because I don't know whether Starmer actually thinks or believes anything. I think he's
that's a very good point.
He's like a robot.
The idea that he thought something through is probably a massive error on my part.
Well, he's just like a robot. He seems to take his orders. He's programmed with the perspective of the day, and he just runs with that. As his now soon-to-be infamous Island of Strangers speech.
Indeed. Well, the Plaid Cymru MP yesterday pointed that out. Is there anything that he believes at the end of the week that he said at the beginning or something of that nature? I thought it was quite a good line. Final one here, the assisted dying bill. The third reading is tomorrow. Many saying it faces collapse, at least 15 MPs reconsidering their support ahead of this Commons debate. Critics, including Sir David Davis, raised concern over GPs initiating the process and insufficient palliative care provisions. I tend to think with this, Charlie, you're either kind of for it or against it, ultimately. A bit like abortion. There's very few grey areas. You plant your opinion there or there.
That's right, and it's because it's quite literally a matter of life and death. And it's conversations like this are ones that we are so poorly equipped to have in the modern world because we are so afraid of death. Quite frankly, in the modern world. We're afraid of pain, we're afraid of suffering, and I think a large part of that is because of our loss of faith and our very immediate kind of mindset where the only thing that matters is the here and now, my material conditions, my material comfort and all this sort of thing. Because I think, I think we're so ready now as a society to start having serious conversations about these issues because there's no public discourse in the UK about abortion, for example, despite the fact that 300,000 abortions take place in the United Kingdom every year. And on this issue of assisted dying, the conversation is always, from those who are in favour of it, think of how much money it will save the NHS, which is an incredibly dark and bleak argument to make, in my opinion. And then there are those who argue against it, who say, well, there will be cases where someone is coerced or perhaps a family member signs the paper because they want their inheritance or whatever else. But I would say to both sides, actually, you're missing the deeper point here, which actually is that suffering is a part of life. Suffering is part of human experience, and it's unavoidable, and it's a necessary part of human experience. And when we had a sense of the sort of metaphysical world around us, when we had a sense of God and a sense of faith as a society, we knew this, we understood this. We understood that as uncomfortable as it is to watch a loved one go through horrendous pain because of a terminal illness, actually that is part of life. And the idea that it is man's place to intervene and to step in and to prevent that actually is overstepping our mark, I would say.
And I think that is a view that, clearly certainly many politicians who will be debating this hold a similar view. Listen, Charlie, we have hit the clock, but you've been brilliant. Thank you.
Cheers, Ian.
Charlie Downs with us here on the programme. He'll be back very, very soon. 0344 499 1000. Back to you coming up next on Talk.
Albanian prisoners and criminals are, a significant number of them in UK jails. A lot of them have been sent back. They did strike a deal with Albania. The last government Rishi Sunak had. So 95% of the Albanians who crossed over do get sent back automatically now, because essentially they have a deal that if you are Albanian and you land in Britain, you try to claim asylum or you try to come here, you just get sent back to Albania immediately, which is a very effective deterrent. And actually, numbers of Albanians crossing illegally into the UK.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Nikki says, as a lawyer, please inform your listeners not to get into the comparison game. It's a futile journey that only ends in tears. When it comes to what happens with one case, isn't always reflected with what happens with it. That's true, and it's always been the case. I've done this job for 20-odd years, and I can't ever think of a time when somebody didn't go, why is it that in Middlesbrough a fella just got 2 years for carjacking, but in Cornwall, bloke did exactly the same thing, got a community. There is no look. It's dependent on different judges. It's dependent sometimes on circumstances. I think the riot stuff, as we saw last year after Southport, and we also saw in 2011 in the London riots, they are sort of very specific. I'm not defending, by the way, because there is no defence of sending people to jail for long times because of half-witted tweets. That's crazy. But they sit against the backdrop of the environment of what is happening. Now, I don't know how that works in law. All I know is that it does, and I mentioned the judge, the district judge, Alan Baldwin, back in 2011, who sent somebody to jail, Nicholas Robinson, 23, from Borough, which is pretty much where we are now in southeast London, nicked a £3.50 bottle of water, or a couple of bottles of water, and he got 6 months in jail. And the judge at the time said the background of the serious public disorder was an aggravating feature. So you acted like that because other people were kind of giving you a green light or something of that. I'm trying to interpret a bloke's thinking. So that's where we are on that one. I think he did get released in the end, which is exactly what the Lucy Connolly story is all about today, whether she is able to walk free. It is ridiculous, 31 months for what happened there. Kirsten is down in London. Kirsten, what are you thinking?
I sort of disagree with you on that, what you just said.
What, you think she should be in jail?
No, so sorry about the law, about the judges having this. I mean, it's a different judge, so it should be, it was a different case. I don't agree. The law should be the law.
Yeah, but it never is it? I mean, goodness me, I've covered court cases, and we always sit there and go, why did someone's just been, Hugh Edwards didn't go to jail.
I mean, it's ridiculous. How can that?
But it's not because he's Hugh Edwards, because, a fella around the corner from me who was a cub leader, he didn't go to jail either for a pretty much similar offence.
Well, yeah, I mean, the example I gave your producer, with Ricky Jones, he pleaded not guilty, did he? Mm-hmm. The councillor Labour. And so on top of that, for me, that would be aggravated by the fact that he's lying, that he...
Well, yeah, but you'd have to... I mean, most people in those cases would he's got a court case to come, so we obviously can't talk about it too much because there is a court case coming.
I suppose, yeah, but I mean, the woman, for an ill tweet, she hasn't been able to be with her child. I am a mother.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
What should have happened to Lucy Connolly, do you think?
I don't know, community service at the most. But just because you think something, apart from the fact that in her case there was a lot of background, having lost another child, I believe. But at the most, community service are going into one of those trainings that you see it. You have to sit, listen to the Walkerati talk about some stuff, and then that's it. But she's been in jail for how long? For a tweet.
Yeah.
What has come down to this?
It's interesting because I would imagine her lawyer probably thought, well, if you plead guilty, because, there's the usual thing is if you plead guilty, you get a more lenient sentence, right? Because the judge goes, well, at least you're not denying it. So I think a lot of those people thought, well, clearly I did write what I can't deny that I wrote this tweet because it's there for all to see. However, had she pleaded not guilty, I don't think she would have ever gone to jail, to be honest, Kirsten.
No.
Because it would have been a jury of 12 people, and somebody would have been able to say, look, what she wrote was, it was clearly not very nice. It's not the sort of thing she would normally do. It was deeply unpleasant. Potentially it might have been dangerous. I don't know. I don't think she was seriously, I can think of cases, and I can't obviously talk about them at the moment, as you and I have just said, where I think somebody did do something and they probably meant it. I think you can take from that what you will. But in her case, I think she probably fired off without thinking. So yeah, tell her she's been a bit daft, which isn't an offence. And as you say, I don't know, I think the humiliation is enough in itself, but 31 months in jail, I mean, that's steep, right? I've forgotten when you get nothing in jail for downloading child pornography.
Exactly. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, you and I have spoken before. I come from a third world country.
Yeah.
And this is just, this is it should be common sense. Where has common sense gone in this country?
Yeah. Where has it gone? That's why we're here, Kirsten. It's great to have you on. Thank you very much indeed for that. This comes in from Shell. Everyone on who is talking about free speech, you come back to imply, but you can't say anything. So why not? That is what free speech is. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never harm me, as the old saying. Well, yeah, but I think I kind of explained that with the tweet. You can't say, go and murder Mick at number 43, because I think he's a paedophile. Do you remember the guy, the paediatrician that had his house attacked? Because some half-wits went, there's a paedophile lives there. So I think they put his windows in, and they went, no, he's a paediatrician. All right, what's that then? Sounds like the same thing. Not really. Anyway, so you end up in that sort of territory. So there are things you can't say, and there is such a thing as responsibility. I think with this question, as Chris Dorr, the KC, raised, it's about whether we kind of separate social media from everything else. So the word on the street, the word in the theatre, the word at the protest, the word at Glastonbury, wherever you happen to be, as being very different to the social media world. So if you stood in the middle of a town centre with a loud hailer telling people to go and burn down hotels because they might have asylum seekers in it, that is demonstrably worse than a stupid tweet, because we know that Twitter is full of stupidity. I am gobsmacked by how much time people clearly spend on it just by looking at how often they tweet stuff. And I think most of us might have a cursory look every now and again. I barely read my own Twitter feed. So there are times during the show when we are given, in the studio, presenters are given a selective amount of, not selective in any kind of freedom of speech way, but just so that they're representative of different views. But yeah, so do we go down that route? Or social media, anything is fine, apart from the killing the paedophile at 43. Apart from that, anything is fine, because it's such a trash heap, such a den of iniquity. And yet I still see people on there going, we are the real news now. This is where the real news is. Really? Wow. And it's usually followed by link after link of the most catastrophic tosh you've ever seen in your life. Unreal. So yes, there is, I would say, Shell. I think that must be Shell who had previously said, do I really believe in free speech? Well, it's an interesting question as well. Should there be a line on what is acceptable? Because there is such a thing as libel, by the way, and there is such a thing as slander. Two slightly different things often get confused. So yes, there are implications of being kind of lazy with your speech and what you say. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
One comes in here from Stuart, says the law should be comparative and judges should be removed if they are consistently out compared to standard comparisons. How can one person, Mike Ainsbury, beat up a constituent and be free, and Connolly gets 31 months for hurty words? And if you put it like that, which is it's frustrating because it's frustrating to try and explain it, because on one hand there is no explanation because it's ridiculous that you can punch a constituent, which, by the way, I would say the fact that he was an MP is a bit like a police officer doing something bad. The bar is kind of higher in many respects, or in Ainsbury's case, the bar was too near because I think he'd been on the sauce or whatever it was. And get 31 months for hurty words. But also on the same day that Ainsbury didn't go to jail, multiple other people didn't go to jail. In fact, most people who were charged with a fight in the street that day wouldn't have gone to jail either. So I don't think the two are specifically comparable, but the sentencing absolutely is. But I don't know what your way around that is, other than telling judges you have to always give this, or you have to always give that. The judge in the Ainsbury case might have gone, this fella's, never going to work again. He's only been an MP for about 5 minutes, and that's it. He's out the flipping door. So he's knackered. He'll be unemployed, untrusted, and will struggle to get a job. I don't know. Maybe the judge took that into account. I think with Connolly, following that logic, the judge should have taken into account this is somebody who's clearly going to be humiliated for a long, long time, will certainly struggle to do the shopping in Waitrose without people pointing and staring. So you could have applied that there as well. But I don't think there's ever been a consistent bar, because we talk about it so often and have done over the years as to why it is you could. Another really obvious one as well is drink driving, which I think is a minimum of 12 months, isn't it? And then you get into that, is somebody going to get 18 months or 20 months, 24 months, etc. You could find a ton of cases where people have got the same amount of alcohol in them, but a magistrate has given 18 months to one and 20 months to another, or 22 months, whatever. Why would that be? Do they listen to circumstances, or is it just what the judge felt at the time? Let's move to this story as well. There's a lot to get through here this afternoon. NHS managers will face pay cuts if they rack up debts or fail to improve care under new productivity rules. The government will offer pay rises to attract bosses to struggling areas, while NHS chiefs could earn bonuses for cutting waiting lists. This comes despite record deaths linked to long A&E waits, with the Royal College of Emergency Medicine study showing that over 16,600 patients died last year. This is England alone. That's a 20% rise on 2023. Let's speak to Dr. Dean Eggett, GP in Doncaster, CEO of the Doncaster Local Medical Committee, who's often helped us out on these kind of issues. Afternoon to you, Dean. NHS managers and pay cuts. I mean, NHS managers are kind of bogeymen, stroke women of the piece here, aren't they? Because whenever, you talk about what's wrong with the NHS, people go, get rid of the managers. I think we all know you need some managers. Someone's got to run the thing, and they don't always have to be a clinician. But what do you broadly think of these new productivity rules?
We do love to demonise NHS managers, don't we? And say that we've got too many of them and they're overpaid. But we need them. So they're extremely good at making this a very, very complicated system work. And without them, it wouldn't work. So we need to look after the managers that we've got. And that's where the thinking is from the government. We need to pay for talent. We need to bring new talent in, and we need to retain talent. But I find this one a little bit uncomfortable, because let's be honest, the whole country is struggling right now, and we're all feeling the pinch and the squeeze. So to hear that individuals on some huge salaries are potentially getting bonuses on top of those salaries for, well, quite frankly, just doing their job doesn't sit quite right. This makes me feel uncomfortable.
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, the government talking about pay rises to attract bosses to struggling areas. NHS chiefs could earn bonuses for cutting waiting lists. I mean, is that how that bit should work of these new productivity rules? Because that sounds, to many people reasonable, although I guess the amount paid for bonuses would be the question. And some would say cutting waiting lists is actually part of your job.
Well, exactly. So as a senior NHS manager, cutting waiting lists is part of your job. Ensuring decent access to care is part of what you sign up to on a day-to-day basis. So to be paid extra for doing your job just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we need to understand that this is actually quite a perverse incentive, because cutting a waiting list is not necessarily actually doing the right thing for patient care. Because let's say, for example, we cut the waiting list by sending a text to patients and saying, do you still want your appointment? And if they fail to respond, we kick them off the list. Well, the waiting list goes down. It looks great on paper, but in reality, we didn't try hard to get those patients into the right place at the right time. So the executive gets paid, the waiting list goes down, but it wasn't the right thing for patients. So the incentive needs to line up with actually good quality care, not really poor outcomes.
You know, kind of, it's worth more than a sentence, I suppose, Dean, but, you know, what is, as a clinician, somebody says to you, what's the best way to cut waiting lists? What's your kind of instinctive go-to answer on that?
Get more doctors. It's a straight answer. You know, this is exactly what we need. We don't have enough rooms and we don't have enough people to look after patients. So we're trying to fudge it with workarounds. So my really straightforward answer to cutting waiting lists is get more doctors and get more rooms.
Just on that point of doctors, I was only reminded of this a little earlier when Julia Hartley-Brewer, my colleague, referenced the, I think it was David Cameron, they put this limit on how many GPs you could train or something of that nature back in the day. I've never been able to find out what the reason was for that. There was obviously, you know, illogical as it clearly sounds, they must have had a reason why they thought that was a good thing. Can you shine any light on that, Dee?
Yes, I can. And I should point out, I was being flippant a moment ago in a certain way. They say get more doctors because, of course, the NHS is much wider than doctors.
Of course.
GPs are a form of that. But the problem is doctors are expensive, and that's why people are having workarounds, and that's why we have a cap. Quite frankly, we don't have the capacity to train that many more, because to train people, you need rooms and you need senior doctors to train training doctors. But at the same time, when those doctors qualify, we need to pay for them. Well, actually, we pay for them whilst they're working, so there's a cost there, and there is a cost for them when they come on stream as independent doctors. So at some stage, you have to cap it and say, well, we've only got so much capacity for this many, but that cap was way too small. We need a great many more doctors, but that in itself is another discussion. How are we going to pay for more doctors, more nurses, more porters, more administrators, and, as we started off, more managers? Because the NHS as a whole needs to expand if we genuinely want to provide the capacity we need.
So what was David Cameron thinking back then?
Saving money. So we have had a problem in the UK and actually across the world for many, many years now, well over a decade, of that there just isn't the public purse to expand public services. And this dates back even beyond, before the days of the collapse of the banking system in the US, and that's played a massive part to it. And things have got much, much worse, of course, since COVID. So what we have is lack of resources and therefore lack of money in the public purse to pay for decent services. And nobody wants to increase taxes because the public are already feeling too much of a pinch. So we're in this catch-22 situation. We need more, but there's no money to pay for it.
But at the same time, recruiting people from elsewhere, often agency workers as well, which, as you know, Dean, turns out at the end in the wash to be a much more expensive way of doing things.
It is. Temporary workers are great for a short period of time, in terms of actually just plugging a gap, but it's not good for them because there's no long-term plan for them and their families. It does turn out to be quite expensive because eventually you lose that talent and you lost an opportunity to train somebody who can hang around and contribute to society as a whole. And I should also point out, when we talked about capping training numbers under a previous government, we do actually have quite a number of GPs at the moment who are unemployed. So we have a glut of doctors at the moment who are willing, ready and capable of working, but we don't have jobs for them. And the reason for that is simply nobody can afford to pay them.
We are living in, I was about to say interesting times, but, you know, I would suggest deeply worrying times, because the smart money, Dean, sort of suggests that this whole thing could get a whole lot worse before it even begins to get better.
Yes, and as President Trump has come in and we're talking about Liberation Day, that has caused uncertainty on financial markets. And as a doctor, I really shouldn't worry about financial markets. I should be thinking about my patients and medicines and all that sort of stuff. But the reality is the world economy really has an impact upon our ability to deliver medicine.
Yep.
If the financial markets are under pressure, so is the government, and therefore so is the NHS, and the patients always feel the pinch.
Dean, thank you as ever for your time. Dr. Dean Eggett, he's a GP in Doncaster, CEO of the Doncaster Local Medical Committee. Thank you to him. Back to you, 0344 499 1000. We'll take some more calls in just a moment, particularly on that issue of free speech. I mean, it is one of those curious moments when two stories kind of collide, and there is a very strong synergy between the two. You've got the Justice Secretary banging on yesterday that we're almost out of prison places. We've got too many people in jail, got to build more prisons, 99% capacity. Let's change the rules so we have a 28-day issue. If somebody is sent back to jail after being released, they'll only serve 28 days. And at the same time, people sitting in jail, most notably Lucy Connolly. There are others who are serving very lengthy prison sentences for stuff they wrote on social media. What's interesting about the Connolly thing, I don't even think that was what you might call the worst thing that was written. It depends on how you look at it. It was pretty awful, but I didn't get a sense, and again, in the law, is this a defence? I didn't get a sense that she literally meant that. I very much doubt whether anybody read that tweet and thought, I'm going to nip and get some Swan Vestas and nip down to the local immigration hotel. I don't think that happened. I know that's not the way you kind of judge law, but it would be a reasonable component of your defence, wouldn't it? That, you know, I realised how it looked. I was just angry. Some very small children died in the most horrific circumstances, many others injured, and I put two and two together, got it wrong, posted it. I regretted it. A few hours later, went for a walk, came home, took it down. 31 months in jail for that. There were others as well. So if the Justice Secretary is serious about freeing up prison places, I know where you could start, Justice Secretary. There's a whole load of people languishing in prison cells because of what they wrote on flipping Facebook or Twitter. And somebody made the point, I can't quite find the tweet now, but it was essentially making the equivalence that what is written today on social media is the equivalent of what used to be written on toilet walls as graffiti. And that's about right, actually. It is about right. You can't really take... well, there's a little element of social media you can take seriously because there is some good stuff on social. That's the annoying thing about it. You meet some really good stuff. And then you get kind of all the nonsense as well. And there are people who live their life, almost a chronic existence on social media, judged by the amount they post or respond to. And they only live in that world and in their own area of interest. And whether that's left wing or right wing, I see the same thing happening. And what usually comes of that is, you know, either conspiracy theories or just invented news or opinion dressed up as news. You know, don't believe what you read in the mainstream media. Here's the truth here, and it's a link to sort of Bob, who does a blog in Wyoming. He's got the truth on what's really happening. Forget all the international news agencies and diligent journalists, even the ones embedded or on the ground in Ukraine. Bob, the blog, has got the answer. Now, why are you not reporting on this? Because Bob's a knob, basically, and he just made it up. That's usually the problem there. But that's the world we live in. So should we just discard anything that's on social media, no matter what you write? But then I did, as I mentioned before, when I was being questioned by Michelle in South Shields about free speech, there is such a thing as libel. So if somebody says to Michelle, you're a bank robber, or we all know about your OnlyFans page, we know how you actually earn a living, and you put that out there, and you got other people to put that out there, and they all piled in, then your employer starts to hit, wow, okay. I mean, is that free speech? No, that's libel. And that's not good. That's not right, okay? That's not okay. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
I cannot in a million years, even if I really exercise myself, even if I really try and understand what is divisive about Island of Strangers, I can't find anything in it. We're an island, yes, and if people don't know each other because they're not saying hello to each other on the street, they're strangers. What is so divisive about saying Island of Strangers?
I just think it's unnecessary and it's a bit exclusionary.
It's
and
not.
It's a bit
It's just
I think it is.
words.
And I think it's no, but words matter and language matters in politics. It does.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000. It's day 9 as well of The Voice of Doom, the mystery voice with the political angle. You are looking for a politician, an MP, but I'm not going to tell you whether they're past or present. There's a bit of a clue there. So it's an MP past or present. They may be still doing it, may not be doing it any longer. Here's the question. Who is this?
This is so interesting.
It's short and sweet. It's not Matt Hancock. Yes, I know it sounds like Matt Hancock. Some of you are convinced it's Matt Hancock. It's not Jacob Rees-Mogg either. They're two of the more popular guesses. Have another listen.
This is so interesting.
Remember, don't call in because we ain't got any prizes at this end, but you can message in if you fancy having a crack at this. 87222. If we get the right answer, we'll tell you after the news at 3. If we don't, it rolls over for day 10 tomorrow. Have another listen.
This is so interesting.
One more time.
This is so interesting.
Who the heck is that? Please put us out our misery. 87222 if you know. Back to your calls. Les in Colchester. What have you got for us, Les? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. First time caller, first time listener.
Welcome along, mate. Nice to have you with us.
I've been trying not to phone in, but...
Try not to, I like that.
Yeah, a bit nervous. So, I've been arrested for inciting racial hatred before.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened was, a couple of weeks after 9/11, 2001, I drew some posters. I drew a hangman's noose, and I wrote on there, on an A4 piece of paper, hang all terrorists. And I went out and I put them on lampposts in different car parks. I got picked up by the police. Police come and took me in, inciting racial hatred.
Wow, that seems an odd... I mean, whatever the rights and wrongs of what you did, the fact that it's racial hatred seems a bit weird.
Because some of the...
Are terrorists a race now? I know they can be, but you know what I mean.
Someone complained that one of them was in the car park near a mosque.
Right.
And because it's around 9/11, it could incite lots of...
Did you deliberately put one near a mosque for that reason?
No, I've done it on 6 car parks.
OK, so that was irrelevant, the mosque thing. Yeah.
Just high footfall. I'm old enough to be around when the IRA were doing their bits and pieces. And, yeah, so when I was arrested and I was in the police cells, they were going for the statements, and I said, on my personal effects, you'll see a keyring, and on that keyring it has IRA scum, and on the other side it says, hang all terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
The superintendent read it, saw it, and said, yeah, 100%, it's not race, colour or creed, no further action, have a nice day. Now,
off you went.
Sitting there thinking, what if I'd done that today? What would be my outcome today?
Yeah, you see, that would be... I mean, what you'd hope would happen if it happened tomorrow, Les, is that there's been so much publicity over the ridiculousness of this stuff that they would turn around and go, yeah, we can't send someone to jail now. But you're right, if you'd done that, you know, last summer, for example, who knows? Because there's some crazy stuff going on out there, right? I mean, I might have done you for lamppost abuse, but not for... not for the... I mean, hang all terrorists. I can't think of anything less controversial, really.
But it was how it was sold to the police at the time. Some had complained they'd seen it near a mosque. It wasn't near a mosque, it was in a car park.
Well, the only person that's got to worry about it is a terrorist, right? Surely.
Yeah. But yeah...
If you're not a terrorist, it clearly isn't you.
Yeah. But on the flip side, the funny side afterwards, when I was talking to a friend...
Yeah.
When I was in the cells and they arrested me for racial hatred, when they offered me food, the first 3 dishes they offered me was chicken tikka masala. And I said, you've just arrested me for racial hatred.
Yeah.
If I was
a true racist would not be eating this stuff. That's a very good point.
Yeah, it's just... I'm just sitting there listening to that poor lady spur of the moment and her anger. I understand that anger. Yeah. I have a friend, Danny, who lost his daughter in the IRA terrorists bombings in London. I've got a friend that's lost someone in the 7/7 bombings. 7/7 terrorists. So it hits a chord, it hits you, and I understand where.
And then she soon realised that it was a stupid thing to put on in a public domain, so she took it down. But by then, as far as the court was concerned, the damage was done. Listen, I've got to move for no other reason, Les. I want to get another caller on this very issue. Stephen is somewhere in Northern Ireland. Stephen, how are you doing?
Hello there, how are you going?
Very good, thanks. You've got a very different view on the Connolly case.
Yes. Well, my view on it is slightly different. Yeah. Now, I think I've got some skin in the game here. Not foreskin, I hasten to add, as I'm Jewish.
Okay.
Now, if someone tweeted some infantile insult about Jews being dirty, wealthy, or whatever, I would treat such comments with the contempt it deserves.
Yeah.
Now, having said this, it would be an entirely different matter if someone tweeted, "Burn down the synagogues," because particularly with the country in the present social mess it's in, you can be sure that there are some lunatic or lunatics out there who might well just go and do that. Now, as a society, we would be on a slippery slope if such tweets were not challenged. And in the absence of adequate policing of the internet, you need strict enforcement of the law. Otherwise, God knows what can happen. It's bad enough as it is.
That's a genuinely interesting kind of counter to what a lot of the comments been, that if somebody had said it about a synagogue, you can I mean, it's not a race to which religion is likely to be attacked more, but nonetheless you think that would have been equally or more inflammatory than what was tweeted by Connolly?
No, I'm saying that if something like that is tweeted and people get away with it, that kind of gives license to God knows how many other people to crawl out from under the stone.
Yeah. I mean, there is something in that, isn't there? I mean, you could say the only good thing that could come out of the Connolly case is that people might put a handbrake on the kind of stuff they want to write. But then, there's a counter to that. You don't want people to be thinking the state are watching me, so I can't write controversial things. What we'd ideally like people not to do is to write, stuff that incites violence of any sort on an individual or a property.
Well, exactly.
Ideally, but you should be able to attack a religion any day of the week.
No, but from what I understand, whatever she had to say about refugees or Asians, whatever they were, is one thing. That's just kind of defamatory. But didn't she say something about burning them?
But burning the hotels that people were in was burning hotels, set fire to the effing hotels.
Setting fire. We're burning them, setting fire. There's only a subtle distinction there, isn't there?
So, well, indeed. So, no, I hear what you're saying. And I think most people agree that maybe there should have been some kind of punishment for that. Or, well, not everybody does, but some people say, OK, but maybe 31 months in jail was over the top. But it's a very good... You're the first person to make that point, Steve. It's not an unreasonable one either, which is that, if you don't check these things or act legally on these things, what's the next tweet going to say? I don't know where to go with that, but I'm happy to take more response. Thank you to Stephen in Northern Ireland, who's also managed to get a 1970s gag in at the beginning as well. Thank you for that. 0344 499 1000. We've got the Voice of Doom. Have we got a winner on the Voice of Doom? This is the voice you need to identify.
This is so interesting.
If you think you know who that is, 87222. You can message in. If we've got a winner, we'll tell you after the news headlines at 3 o'clock. They're coming next on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Afternoon Empire indeed, and the home of common sense, of course. 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Good afternoon, welcome back. We are discussing Keir Starmer's idea of freeing up prison places, and that's to, well, some call invite criminals to cause carnage after cutting jail terms for dangerous offenders. Prison capacity has hit 99%. So who do you release? How do you deal with that? What about some people who wrote some bad stuff on social media? Maybe that's the place to start. Also this afternoon, the NHS is now treating nursery-age kids identifying as transgender after scrapping its previous minimum age limit of 7. I don't even know where to start on this stuff. You thought some of this nonsense might be over, but they ain't stopping now. And a new study by the Institute of Economic Affairs ranks the UK as Europe's 7th biggest nanny state, citing strict rules on smoking, sugar and alcohol. Are we better for the bans or the curtailing of all this stuff? I went to Bulgaria a few weeks ago, trying explaining that over there. Can't smoke in Bulgaria, it's almost compulsory. That's just for the kids. Our lines are open, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk, lots to wade through, including, of course, the voice of doom. Have we got a winner? Well, here's the voice we asked you to try and identify.
This is so interesting.
These are some of the guesses, and the wrong ones at that. Someone said it's Ian doing a Matt Hancock impression. Sadly not. Rupert Lowe, no. Tony Blair, no. Ian Duncan Smith, it is not. Alex Sharma, no. Christopher Chope, Michael Gove, William Hague, Alistair Darling, no. Zia Youssef, Jeffrey Archer, no. We still have not got a correct answer. I'll give you a further clue ready for tomorrow. You're looking for a Labour, former or present Labour politician. That's all I'm going to say right now. I might put a bit more meat on that tomorrow. 0344 499 1000. That's where you'll find us. This from Brad, who says, poor Lucy Connolly should not only be freed, she should receive compensation. It's an absolute disgrace that Starmer encouraged the judiciary to make an example of her. That is the worst aspect of this. I mean, I have to say, Brad, there's literally no evidence of that. I know everybody's saying, or a lot of people are saying, no, it can't. Absolutely no evidence that there was anything from... If that were to get out, and we'll find out in 30 years when they release all the papers, that the Prime Minister had interfered with the judiciary, then it would be the end of the Prime Minister. Literally no evidence, and I'm bound to give the... And I get it, Brad, I get what Brad is saying, because sometimes you think, well, why suddenly do all these people who, if they did this offence a month before, would never have gone to jail for any of these things, but now, you know... I'm going to draw your attention back to 2011 when exactly the same thing happened. There was no Keir Starmer in sight in 2011, unless David Cameron did the same thing back then. London riots, people getting sentenced to jail in areas that we didn't really have social media. Well, we did, but it certainly didn't have the prominence that it now does. But people did get stiff prison sentences for some... I don't want to say innocuous stuff, but some stuff that, again, on any other day of the week, you would not have gone to jail. Let's look at this story. The NHS is now treating nursery-age kids who believe they are transgender after dropping a planned minimum age limit. Now, originally, specialist gender clinics were set up only to see kids aged 7 and older, but the age restriction was removed following a consultation. NHS England is said to have caved to pressure from trans activists, with up to 10 nursery-aged children and 157 under 10s now referred for counselling and therapy, although it should be said no puberty blockers are given. I think that is still a bit of a no-no. Let's speak to Miranda Yardley, human rights activist, on this very point. Miranda, I mean, I wasn't even aware of what the age thing was in this area, so I was actually quite surprised to see that there was a kind of ruling on this in the first place, but now it seems to have disappeared, and we could see treatment for nursery-age children if they or their parents believe them to be transgender, getting NHS treatment of some kind, therapy, whatever it happens to be. What's your initial response to that? And good afternoon to you, by the way.
Good afternoon. My initial response is that with all of these things that we see, and even with the piece that is being shared and seen that's in the Telegraph, the devil's always in the detail. There are two quotes in there from Helen Joyce and Stephanie Davis-Arai, which really hit the nail on the head. Helen Joyce expresses deep concern about the use of what is called the affirmation model, which is where these clinics, I feel reluctant to call them medical establishments of any form, to be honest, where these clinics have been affirming without question these ideas that these children have some sort of metaphysical gender identity that is at odds with their sex body. Stephanie Davis-Arai makes an extremely good observation as well. I mean, if you're okay, I'd like to quote from that.
Please do. Yes, please do.
It says, what she says is, although it seems unbelievable that children under 5 are being referred to the new gender hubs, it was a recommendation of the CAS review that children are seen as early as possible. This makes sense because parents have been given such bad advice for so long and may believe their child is transgender. Trans lobbyists have told parents that children know their gender identity from age 3 and there is no harm in affirming a child's identity. It is important that these parents can get proper information and sensible advice from the gender hubs rather than listening to activists. And for what it's worth, I would say that if a parent is considering that their child is trans of any form and or a child is being taken to any of these places, the people that they really need to be kept, well, the people that need to be kept away from them are the activists, because the activists are pushing bogus claims and bogus science to project their own identity issues and adult problems onto children as a way of legitimizing their claims to their identity.
Indeed, and activists, as you know, Miranda, from looking at these kind of stories, if you look deeper into the activists, their causes extend into all sorts of other areas. They would like to see a world without borders, a world without everyone's individual identity as equally as important as everybody else's, etc. Politically, they come from often the very hard left in this respect. They don't like the idea of tradition, they don't like the idea of convention, etc. There is a bit of a pattern with these characters, and somehow, and I don't know how, people in high places have been listening to them. And I don't know whether that's out of fear of thinking, well, if we don't listen to these people, that makes us transphobic and that makes us very bad people, or whether there's something else going on.
Yeah, I mean, not going to be difficult. I'm going to challenge some of the things that you said. I mean, about this being something from the hard left, the whole concept of ideas of gender identity and the sovereignty of identity is so far out of keeping with what the left used to be, which was a materialist intellectual position that was based upon ideas of analysing things that were real.
Should I say the new left then? Is that maybe that's the invented, the synthetic left? Perhaps that's the better way.
It's like there's been a big horseshoe, because you look at the activity of these people, and this they might claim to be extreme left, but they kind of horseshoe around to be the extreme right.
100%.
They use violent rhetoric. In fact, the use of violent rhetoric against women has been, incredibly common. It's been the norm for going on for a decade and a half, maybe 2 decades within this debate on social media. And in the real world, when this spills over to activism and women meeting in the real world, you get these goons show up and they're threatening, and there's actual threats and actual violence against women being utterly swept under the carpet and seen as being some sort of great fight. And it it really is not. It's really not a great position for someone to hold, because it reinforces every single negative stereotype out there, that it imposes these negative stereotypes on children, and it leads to a tremendous amount of unchecked threats of violence against women and lesbians and gay men and anyone else who stands up and says that we're not going to, we don't agree with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you, and that is the problem. I don't know whether these people actually believe it, or they've kind of almost hypnotized themselves into somehow believing it. There's a lot of groupthink in that, and a lot of echo chambers, or what it is. But you're right, and they don't spare anyone whose view differs from them, and they believe they are punching up. So they've convinced themselves that battle is okay, and violence. They see themselves as pioneers of this kind of cause in this world, and probably very often lose sight of literally what they're meant to be arguing about and talking about. And I think they cover many other areas in their politics too when you look at them. I'm bound to ask though, in terms of the original story here, kids getting gender treatment of whatever kind. It's not medical treatment in the sense that anyone's going to get puberty blockers or be injected or have any kind of surgery, but counselling or whatever it happens to be. What is the age that it's okay to take your kids somewhere because you believe they are transgender?
Well, that's a really good question. I think any of these treatments that are offered, that are put out there as being things that people can do to affect their gender, whatever that may be, I think it's a bit like smoking, really. It's something that belongs to the world of adults, and children should be kept away from it, and even the adults that do it would probably be best advised not to.
So as a 7-year-old, you didn't personally have any sort of, desires or asking an adult around you to take you to the doctors?
Only when I felt I had tonsillitis or something like that. I think a lot of
That's why you should be going to the doctors, yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of this is coming from parents who are seeing behaviour in young children that, they've got a boy that isn't doing what they think boys should do, that the behaviour, we've seen for a while that a lot of girls and boys who are who do not behave like their peers, who are effectively I'm going to use the term gender non-conforming, even though I hate using the word gender because it means literally anything. But you see children who are sexual stereotype non-conforming, and what is being read into it is not that they might be pre-homosexual children, or they might be children who would grow up to be gay. Or it's that they're born into the wrong body, and this whole idea of children being able to just play and do things that are, as some form of creative play. They should be able to do that without it being read into it that it is some inner some expression of some sort of inner torment or incompatibility that their gendered soul has with the rest of
and you're right, there is a certain type of parent that I think actually quite wants this to be the case. They want to join in with it. My little boy came home from rehearsing a school play the other day with some makeup on his eyes because he wanted to show us what it looks like, and I said to my other half, I said, if we lived in the wrong part of Hampstead, I can imagine somebody would be taking him down the clinic tomorrow because they go, look, there's the signs. He's got the eye makeup on. Yeah, this is the journey we're going on now. There is, I think, that desire from some. And you look at some of the curious, wacky social media posts of, I don't know, there was a trans couple I saw the other day who's all 3 kids, 2 from one and 1 from the other. All 3 kids apparently were trans as well. And you look at that and you know where I'm going with this. You think, well, the laws of probability would suggest that all 5 of you in this family are trans. I mean, that would be extraordinary, right?
No, I think the laws of probability would say if you've got children that have 2 parents who are completely fixated on themselves and projecting their own adult traumas onto their children, that there's a very high probability that their children will grow up with and having some sort of disturbance to themselves. So that would not surprise me at all that would happen. I think transgender ideology is absolutely horrific. It's incredibly damaging to particularly to girls, but it's damaging to boys as well. It needs to be kept out of schools. It needs to be kept out of hospitals. Calling it anything to do with healthcare is not a healthcare.
No, it isn't. And I think most sane people recognise that immediately. Listen, great to have you on. Always good to gauge your views on these things. Thank you, Miranda Yardley, human rights activist, just speaking basic common sense on this stuff. Let's get a voice note on this very issue from Katie.
I'm a mum of a 5-year-old, and she can't even decide who's her best friend from day to day, let alone what her gender is. This is absolute codswallop, and it needs to stop. It absolutely needs to stop.
Absolutely spot on. I got a 6-year-old and he can't work out, who his mates are from day to day. One minute this is the best friend. I got home the other day. There was a new best friend I'd never seen before who was having a play date. I thought, who's she? I've never seen her. This delightful little kid playing beautiful. He said, this is my best friend, Daddy. And it's like, right, okay, I didn't know that. I thought he was your best friend. No, it's new best friend. And that could go for all sorts of things. The idea that you'd be questioning and fretting and having problems with your gender identity at that age is absolutely, well, I can't say that it's absolute cobblers, right? We're going to take some more calls in a few moments' time. Loads to talk about here this afternoon. It's been busy. 0344 499 1000. Before we carry on, time to remind you how you could be in with that chance of winning that weekend away in Munich at the end of May to watch the biggest game in European football. This is the Champions League final. And also, thanks to our colleagues at talkSPORT, we're also giving you £5,000 in your pocket to spend exactly how you wish. It's an incredibly generous prize. You want to be in with a chance of winning. Here's the detail.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation, and an uber-massive $5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus, UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win all of that, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May at 11 p.m. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or send your name and number by post to Champions League Final Competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 21st of May. This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is James Ask with Mike. He is the chief executive and founder.
Did you get a cupcake?
I didn't get a cupcake, James, but thank you.
Do you want a cupcake, Simon?
No, it's fine. I just want to know what happens next after this.
Who knows? We'll see. Look, everyone said we wouldn't get this far, right? Including yourself. So let's see. I think we've been pretty open and transparent with the journey, the difficulties, the problems, the challenges. So sometimes now we'll see what happens next.
If I were you, I wouldn't get on that plane. He doesn't sound like the sort of guy that should be running an airline. You know, we'll see what happens tomorrow. I mean, you know, what the hell's he talking about?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Right back on it. Chris Cornish, we were talking about the end-of-life bill. This is essentially about voluntary euthanasia, the right to take your own life should the time come. Third reading tomorrow in the House of Commons. It's looking a little wobbly from where it once was. Naturally, we'll report on how that all goes tomorrow. But Charlie Downs, our guest earlier, very much against it, saying it's wrong for medicine to intervene. And, you know, pain is sometimes part of the process of life. You know, you're born, you live it, and then, you know, why is it for a human to intervene? On that point, Chris says, your guest summary of pain and suffering being part of life must surely apply to any kind of medical intervention. Prolonging life is interfering with nature too. It's a very good point, isn't it? I mean, you could say anything that stops pain. And Stuart, similarly, Charlie Downs is wrong to say suffering is part of life. Inhuman doctors prolong suffering with their claim that it's palliative care. It's up to an individual to decide when they want to die, not the state. Although I don't think, you know, we had a palliative care doctor on the other day, Stuart, and I don't think for 1 minute you would call him inhumane. And certainly in terms of what they can only act on the law at the moment, by the way, of course, and that's to make somebody as comfortable as you possibly can. Many of them will retain their position that they don't think you should have the right to end your own life. But I'm sure others who work in palliative care at the moment will have a different view on that, etc. Let's go to William in Glasgow. Back to that question of Lucy Connolly. William, what have you got for us? Afternoon to you.
Yeah, Ian, love your show, by the way.
Thank you,
really
sir.
is the home of common sense.
That's very kind.
But my question is that Lucy Connolly pled guilty. Now, I watched something not long ago, and I think he was a murderer, and he pled guilty. And the judge said he was going to give him 12 years. But because he pled guilty early, he'll cut his sentence to 7 years. Wow. So had Lucy Connolly pled not guilty and then get found guilty, what sort of sentence was she going to get?
That's very true, yeah. And that would have been the dilemma, isn't it? Thinking if you plead guilty, you will get a lesser sentence. But you're right. I mean, based on the judge's own logic, she'd have been serving 62 months for this offence.
Yeah, 5, 6 years. But another point I'd like to make is that, remember the black family that attacked the police officers in Manchester and broke a female police officer's nose? Have they ever been charged with anything?
Yes, I am just going to correct the word black in that, just to be accurate. These are allegations, of course, because there is still an ongoing case, William. I don't know what the status is. It did come to court at some point, but I think it's going back because it's not yet been wrapped up.
Well, they dealt with Lucy Connolly pretty quick.
Yeah, well, that particular one went on for months before we got any sign. I think the complexity was I don't know, I'm guessing here. If you remember, there was an allegation that the police officer had kicked somebody in the head during all of this, and that, I suppose, was a separate investigation. I don't know. I'm just surmising as to what the thinking... I'd love to know, like yourself, I'd love to know why that took so long for charges to be brought, but the case itself, I don't know where the hell that's gone.
Yeah, can I just make another point, Ian?
Yeah.
You had a caller on, a Jewish fella from Ireland, and he was on about, making these comments and doing things like that. So who would they rather send to jail first? Would they rather send to jail Lucy Conley who texted something stupid and immediately showed remorse? Or would they rather send somebody that broke his nose to jail? Which one did they choose first?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, when you look at those, those kind of cases and you put it like that, we all know what the answer is, don't we? William, thank you very much, William in Glasgow. Sarah, somewhere perhaps just down the road or even round the corner in Glasgow. Sarah, how are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Thanks for taking my call.
It's a pleasure. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I was listening to your radio station there with regards to transgenders, children going into these types of institutions, sort of, where they can then diagnose, tell them, go ahead, you can do that.
Get some counselling going,
Yeah, so about 18 years ago, my son, who is still a boy, thank God, he was going through lots of trauma when me and his father had broke up, and we got referred to CAMS. Now, CAMS put us in touch with another therapist, and when we were having these types of conversations with my son at the time, he would say, quite a lot of the time, I feel like I'm in the wrong body. I don't want to be a boy. I want to be a girl. I want to chop my willy off. I don't like it. And he would literally cry, and it was so convincing.
Wow.
So,
what sort of age was he then, Sarah?
So he would have been 4, 5, 6, up until the age of 7.
Wow, it's interesting that that's what was happening in his mind.
Yeah, it's on his mind. But I would put this down too. We didn't have now this is not obviously in every child's situation, but the relationship I had with his dad was not a positive one. He was very feminine in his approach, so he is gay, so he would come out, he would wear, oh Mum, let me put your shoes on, oh Mama, I'm going to wear your clothes, look at me, and he would prance around, and everybody knew that he was gay from birth. But trying to tell a child that at that age, when you should not be labelling them, just let them be who they are, let them feel how they feel, but when you're then pushed into a corner by professionals who then tell you, well, you need more help, this isn't normal, or he needs to make his own decisions.
Oh, Matt, can you imagine this happening today? And
well,
you got
it does still happen.
I know, but if you were in that position today and you got into a conversation with the wrong kind of person, counsellor or medic, it would only be a matter of time before one of them had said to you, what you might have on your hands there is actually a little girl, not a little boy.
Well, they actually did put through the assessment to go to a clinic where they actually deal with children who feel like they're in the wrong body. I never went to those appointments. I just thought, I'm not going here. And when I mention this to my son now, he's like, oh my God, thank God you never did that. The thought of it says is like, I was just gay. I was gay. I didn't know as a child. I just wanted to be a girl because. Do you know what I mean? So yeah.
There it is. Listen, Sarah, it's I was about to say a wonderful story, because it is a wonderful story, because you were able to keep your head about you and not be persuaded to go down some kind of route that would have been terrible for a 4, 5 or 6-year-old. Thank you, Sarah, in Glasgow as well. Lots of calls and comments coming through from you. We'll go back to some more of those in just a couple of moments. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, just gone 3:30. We'll do some more comments in just a moment. And this story as well, a new study ranks the UK as having one of Europe's biggest nanny states, placing it in 7th overall places. You know, there's a little part of me that wondered that, given the sort of strange world we've lived in for quite a while now, particularly what it feels at the moment, that we might be higher up the list than 7, but bad as that is. The Nanny State Index 2025 by the Institute of Economic Affairs cites strict rules on smoking, sugar and alcohol as key reasons. Upcoming bans on disposable vapes, tougher tobacco laws, a vape tax, food ad restrictions mean the UK will likely rise further by 2027. This is better than the Eurovision Song Contest. Let's talk to Mark Littlewood. He's, of course, Director of Popular Conservatism. Afternoon to you, Mark.
Hello, Ian. Great to be with you.
And lovely to have you with us. I mean, I'd love to say, well, I'm really surprised about this, but I'm really not surprised about this. I went to Bulgaria a couple of weeks ago. They'd have been about 10,000th on that list, I reckon, looking at what goes on over there. But number 7 we are, and it looks like we might be rising.
Yes, that's right. I think that's the highest the UK's been for some time as well. This index comes out from the Institute of Economic Affairs, my old stomping ground, every couple of years. So, yeah, Turkey and Latvia are even more restrictive than us. But at the more freedom-loving end of the chart, you've got Germany, Luxembourg, Italy, Czechia, used to be called the Czech Republic, Spain. So basically what the author of this report has done is he's tried to put a number behind each restriction and each tax, and then generate a number out of 100 for each country. And the closer you are to 100 out of 100, the more restrictive you are. At 100 out of 100, you're North Korea, of course, but we don't include them in the list because it's the EU plus the UK plus Turkey. 29, we are, in terms of freedom crushing, in the worst quarter of those 29.
That's incredible. So, number 1 on the list was who?
Turkey.
So Turkey was that. That might surprise a lot of people, because in fact, I think somebody did put me right on this recently, because you'd think you go to Turkey and it would be the sort of place where, you know, if you went into a restaurant, the chef would have a cigarette on the go while they're frying up your dinner, because you do still see that in some countries in Europe. And
well, that's right. I think, Ian, what you've got to bear in mind is we're measuring the laws here, not so much, you know, that's what Christopher Snowden at the IEA's done. That's what this index is looking at, not whether they're abided by.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. Why do we suppose Turkey might be up there? Because, I mean, I appreciate they might have some sort of religious component to
advertising restrictions. Those sorts of things.
That's a good point.
Stricter advertising restrictions. But, you know, of course, the UK's gone pretty crazy on advertising restrictions. I mean, you can't advertise cake on the London Underground, for example. Not only can you not advertise cake, you can't even put up a poster advertising a theatrical production that might show a piece of cake.
Well, because that actually happened, didn't it? And Sadiq Khan, who curiously has been perfectly relaxed about, you know, many areas of advertising that I would certainly say that's a bit iffy. But, you know, when it came to cake, they banned a theatre poster because it had a slice of banoffee pie or something on it.
Yeah. I think what the really interesting thing about this report is too often times in these sort of debates, we assume there's a kind of trade-off between freedom and health. But if you want lots of freedom, the inevitable consequence is too many people will smoke and get bronchitis and heart disease. Too many people will drink and get cirrhosis of the liver. Too many people will eat cake and become obese, and so on and so forth. But interestingly, the author of the report finds there is no correlation. You're giving up your freedom for no obvious health benefit.
Well, it's not as if we don't know that there is, you know, if you eat a fizzy drink 3 times a day, it's not going to be good for you. Who doesn't already know that?
Quite. And it even looks like the taxes don't really work either. I mean, if you were to take a tax on cigarettes, for example, OK, some people are paying it, but what it's also done is lead to an absolute boom in black market cigarettes and smuggling. So people are buying cigarettes more cheaply because at legitimate retail price they're far too expensive. So it's not that by being towards the top of the most nannying league you're anywhere near the top of the health league. In fact, the more nannying you are, it doesn't even make any difference.
Well, which is curious, because you could at least give them a bit of wiggle room or benefit of the doubt if they could provide some sort of demonstrable evidence that, you know, well, you know, you say it's restrictive, but look, no one's obese. when in fact the very opposite, of course, seems to be the case in the UK. You do wonder when I think Boris Johnson, George Osborne was behind one sugar tax. I think was Boris behind another, perhaps, I don't know, something like that. But you sort of wonder who politicians talk to when it comes to making policy.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I mean, I can remember when the fizzy drinks tax came in, and at that stage, although I understand the government might close this loophole, they excluded any drinks with milk in it. So some sort of, frappuccino with a total ton of sugar in it didn't get the tax applied to it, but a can of cola, full-fat cola, did. And I was actually talking to some soft drink manufacturers who were wondering whether to put a drop of milk into their recipe in order to actually avoid the sugary drinks tax. I mean, a lot of it, I think, is puritanical, nannying, a belief that the experts can tell us all how to live our lives. But of course, another aspect of it is the government is always desperate, thirsty for revenue. And it's sometimes easier to justify whacking a tax on sugary things or alcoholic things or tobacco products than it is to whack a tax on, income, for example.
Indeed. And of course, the wider issue, and it's always been for me, apart from that half an hour when I was 18 and thought I was a socialist, we all went there for a bit, and then realised that that's akin to idiocy. Since then, I've always thought the ultimate aim of the human journey, certainly in the Western world, is to be able to live with the smallest possible government, and that government should get smaller and smaller and smaller, and as we go through the ages, in 3050, we won't really, there'll just be a fella who sits there in a booth, like a car park booth, collecting a bit of tax here and there, and that's all you need, because we all know how to behave, we all know what's right and wrong, etc. And yet this kind of stuff goes very much against that, and very much, the idea, most politicians secretly love, I think, the idea that they're in control and not us.
Yeah, I mean, I rather share your dream there, Ian, but unfortunately it's proved to be only a dream and not reality over our lifetimes, right? You would generally think that as the population becomes more informed, that it's much easier to discover information. I mean, if you went back 50, 60, 70 years, people didn't know that smoking cigarettes was bad for them, for example. You can now find tons of information about the health impacts of smoking at the click of a switch on your iPhone. As we get more and more prosperous, we're immeasurably more prosperous. You would have thought we could do with we could cope with a rather smaller welfare state.
Indeed.
We actually get a bigger welfare state the more prosperous we get. So unfortunately, it seems that we end up not with the size of the state that we need, but with the size of the state we can afford. And as we get richer, we therefore get a bigger state.
There it is. That's a miserable old prediction, but I think you're absolutely bang on, Mark. That's the curious thing. Listen, great to have you on as ever. Mark Littlewood, always speaking some common sense. He's the director of Popular Conservatism. It's curious, the nanny state, having a big state. I've got some mates who are quite relaxed about all of that. That they actually think, and it's fine, by the way, because again, we're not North Korea. We're a democracy. You're free to think whatever you want. They think, some of them, that we function better with a big old template of rules and regulations, that as a human, and not because they think politically, not that they're left wing or anything like that, just that we, as humans in the Western world, where life is busy, sometimes dramatic, sometimes challenging, sometimes awful and upsetting, other times good, etc., the best way, the most efficient way to exist is by having a government that has a good, healthy grip and control on what is done. And that, from institutions to rules, regulations. Well, yeah, I want my government to build roads, I want them to provide a health service, but I don't want them to provide a law about what I can drink or what I can eat, unless I'm going to go and kill an emu and try and bake it in my oven. Then that would be an offence. Beyond that, it's up to me what I stick in my body, isn't it? But there is a belief, it works better when you've got those regs around you. Paul's in Newport. What have you got for us, Paul? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, my friend. Good afternoon. Interesting show as ever. Love it, love it.
Thank you.
Just listen to your man say, that most of these, if you look at all the taxes, in most instances, just chase the dollar. Whether you call it a sugar tax or this tax, they're really, all governments, they're skinny. They're just trying to get some more money. But every now and again, they get one spectacularly wrong. And I won't tell you to the end who said this, but there was a thing about the sort of almost obscene focus on smoking. You know, the tax went up, and you can't do this, you can't smoke. If you want to smoke in your house, you've got to be at least 10 streets down. And so over the years, fewer and fewer and fewer people smoke. The problem is, of course, is that now people have stopped dying at 67 because their lungs have packed up, and therefore they don't claim a pension because they're dead, and they don't go into the NHS with dementia and live until late 80s. And so the repercussions of the smoking ban, shall we say, is that you just created an even bigger problem.
A more expensive society.
Massive, it's massive. When you think, when everyone smoked, okay, I mean, I'm early 60s, and when I was a kiddie, most guys had a puff. I'm not saying we were on 40 a day, but we had a puff.
Yeah.
And the average age of death for a man was like 67. Well, you didn't get your pension till you were 64, I think, at the time. So if you were lucky, you got 3 years pension, and then you was in a box.
Yeah.
And of course, you look at other people. So the NHS was going. So if they needed body parts, so as long as they didn't need the lungs, they go, oh, that one's got a good set of eyes.
Yeah. So there was a big old benefit in dying at that age for the overarching state, and now we live to we're about 120 and cost everyone else a fortune.
Absolutely. So you sort of think. I do believe that so the tax is initially imposed because they're just trying to find another way to get more cash because we're all skinned. It's like the insurance premium tax, which started off at something like sort of 1.5%. If you remember, all those years ago, it was 1.5%, and they said going to make the planet greener. If you want to go on holiday and book your holiday insurance, we're going to bang you with a 1.5% tax. It's currently 15%.
Is that what it is?
15%. It's crazy.
And that's that's on any
insurance.
Any insurance so travel insurance, house insurance?
Yeah, house insurance, car insurance, 15%. And it started off at 1.5. Double check this before you It started off at 1.5, and it was to do with air duty.
Yes.
So if you sort of started flying away and you took your insurance out, it was 1.5. It's now 15%.
That is insane. I was talking to a fella the other day who was buying a house, wanting to buy a house. So he lives in an area, so his house is worth about £1 million, right? And it's not worth £1 million because he could afford to buy £1 million house. He bought a £100,000 house years ago, and it happens to be in an area where it's £1 million. They want to move houses. To move house will cost him. This is the stamp duty thing, Paul. It's going to cost him. The figure was something like. It was about £67,000 or something.
Yeah.
I thought, hang on a second, £67,000 to move from that house to round the corner. Who thought that's okay? That's criminal.
It is, but I do believe with most things, not all things, but with most things, if you boil it down, if you get to the nugget, okay, it's just trying to get some money. They're just trying to get cash because we are not just us. Everyone's so strapped, aren't they?
Yeah, and I can't work out where this is going to go. I mean, seriously, I know it sounds like there's a whole other conversation, but in terms of, we're short of doctors, we're short of funds to fund the doctors, we're short of teachers and funds to fund the teachers, roads that can't be repaired, all manner of other areas of infrastructure. Where does this go, Paul? I mean, what has to happen? And it's going to get worse, right? Clearly it's going to get worse.
It is going to get worse, absolutely. Until we control our spending, until we, it's wrong to do so, but let's look at it as a household.
Yeah.
If you say, OK then, so you earn £500 a week, so you can only spend £500 a week, and you've got, £150 a week goes on your mortgage and blah, 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 blah. And then you end up with what we're going to call disposable income, which is £80. But bit by bit, you're still earning £500, but all of a sudden you think, well, where's my disposable income? It used to be £80.
Yeah.
Now it's £40, okay? And then you think, well, hang on, that guy over there or that girl over there who does nothing at all, they're on some sort of system, benefit system, if you like, and they get they don't pay rent, they don't pay the gas, they don't pay the electricity, and you're working, so you're paying everything, and you get £40 a week that's left of it. They're not working, and they're getting nothing at the end. They have no disposable income.
Sure.
And when they talk of the 9 million people that are economically inactive.
Yeah.
Right. Some of my I'm in my early 60s, Ian, right? Some of my friends have literally, they've got a few quid. They're not millionaires, but they've got enough to get them by till they're 67 and the state pension kicks in, a little bit more than that. And they're literally going, forget it, I'm not doing it. And they've just stopped work. They don't claim any benefits.
Yep.
They're just living off their savings, and they say, but I'm out. Count me out. I'm not interested in it.
Wow.
But they're just walking away. And these are guys with years and years of experience in manufacturing and all sorts of architect. My oldest brother is an award-winning architect, and he said, I've had enough, and literally just walked away. Doesn't work.
Yeah, I get it. There is that. I speak to more and more people, Paul, that have exactly that kind of analysis on their own situation and the current world we're living in. Listen, great call, Paul. Thank you, Paul in Newport on the nanny state. We'll have more from you in a few moments. Alex Phillips is here on the other side of the news at 4 o'clock. And once again, I want to give you a reminder here about what can happen at the end of this month. You could be in with a chance of winning that weekend away in Munich at the end of May. This is, of course, the biggest game in European football. Some would say the biggest game in world football. It's certainly one of two. The Champions League final. I mean, I've been to one of these a few years ago. They are I mean, you can imagine the size and everything that goes with it. Absolutely, the stakes are high, and the silverware is winking at one of them. It's amazing. It's gladiatorial. It's the most exciting way you can watch a game of football, and that's live in a big stadium. So thanks to our colleagues at talkSPORT. We're also, in addition to the weekend away in Munich and, of course, tickets for the match, we're going to give you £5,000 to put in your pocket to spend however you like. It's going to be an absolute belter. Good luck to whoever wins. And this is the detail.
Win a once-in-a-lifetime trip to watch the Champions League final live. Go to talksport.com/win for your chance to embark on the ultimate odyssey of football ecstasy. With 2 tickets to the Champions League final live at the iconic Munich Football Arena, Germany, including flights, accommodation, and an uber-massive £5,000 in your hand. How about that? Enter online now at talksport.com/win. Terms and conditions apply. Achtung, baby.
18 plus, UK, excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win all of that, simply text the word football to 83338 by the 16th of May at 11 p.m. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or send your name and number by post to Champions League final competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 21st of May. This is a TalkSport limited competition run on TalkSport Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
We lost a huge amount of public trust and confidence, and I'm the first person to acknowledge that. But we've got to win that back by being honest about the mistakes we made.
If you have to do a deal with a Nigel Farage at Reform to do that, to oust Labour, would you do it?
I want to put Reform out of business. I want to send Nigel back to
And if you can't put Reform out of business, which doesn't look likely right now, given they're ahead of you by quite a long way in the polls, would you do a deal?
No, look, Kemi's been very clear. No pacts, no coalitions.
Are you very clear?
Yeah, I've said for a very long time that my objective is to bring back, over time, the millions of voters that we lost at the last election.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We were talking earlier about David Cameron being at the helm when the cap on the number of medical school places happened. I referenced that because Julia Hartley-Brewer had talked about it a little earlier. And Gary, very diligently, has sent me a little screen grab of the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, talking about the meeting of doctors voting to limit the number of medical students, and that was back in July 2008. So that's pretty much 17 years ago, and that was the medicalist. The BMJ, the BMA, and I have no idea whether it's all British Medical Association people behind that or others, whoever it happens to be, but certainly I'm confused as the reason why they would want it. Gary says it was to avoid an overproduction of doctors, which is normal speak for doctors keeping in short supply to keep their wages high. Well, yeah, if the BMA are behind it, then yeah, I would imagine that. Just Me on Twitter says, Ian, you honestly believe ex-users are that bad? Then why does Talk have an account? Why not just stick to email, WhatsApp and messaging? Just remove yourselves from X. No, you slightly missed what I said, Just Me, and that was that there are some incredible uses of social media, and that is that legit places also have an account. And they're great areas to read snippets, bite-sized chunks, little moments or videos, whatever. It's got a great use, but it's contaminated with another. It's not ex-users as a collective, but if you want to find the worst excesses of human behaviour, desires, warped opinions, and mostly fake news. If you want to find that, that's where you will find it. And I never reply to, once in a while I might reply to this stuff. I'll always have somebody say, I'm not listening to you guys, you're talking nonsense, I'm listening, this is where I get my news, on Twitter. And then you look at the kind of nonsense and the people that they might follow, or the things they've once in a while you'll click on and see what they've posted, and it's proper tinfoil hat stuff. It ticks every box. It's not one conspiracy theory, it's like all of them, every single one of them. But it's not just that. I can let that slide. But it's the vile way I see people talking to each other. We can have a guest on that somebody disagrees with. It takes about half an hour for somebody to tweet and call them a four-lettered word, and not the one that begins with F. Kaz says, not all of us have a brain of a walnut and talk trash, referring to social media. I also have a Facebook page where I spread that muck too, says Kaz. Bracket joke. Thank you, Kaz, for that. Let's get a very quick word from Alan in Portsmouth on prisons. Alan, good afternoon to you. We've not got long, but I'm sure you can do it. What have you got to say?
Yeah, good afternoon. Yeah, you asked earlier. I believe that you shouldn't get a prison sentence for driving whilst disqualified, which is classed as a criminal offence.
It's interesting. What if you keep doing it, which is always the concern? What if you kept doing it even though you're banned?
Yeah. Maybe if you did it more than once. Yeah. Well, why would that make a difference?
Well, how would you deal with somebody then who keeps committing the same offence? What are you meant to do? tell you what, stay where you are, Alan. Kev will come back to you about 7:10 on that one, but thank you. That's Alan in Portsmouth. Alex Phillips is here, looking very happy for some reason.
Yeah, Kev is currently detained.
Detained? What's that?
Yeah, he's sitting out there, his glasses have come off, and he's got, you know, Vanessa doing her hardest work to make him look like a human. That's not an easy task. The cement mixer's going, the brushes are all out.
It's going like Billy-O.
It's like turning a Picasso into a Da Vinci.
Yeah.
And even then, it doesn't really